family, but an act of compassion is not out of the question for him. Also, he loves his brother a great deal, and if the Kingslayer's return is due to Lady Catelyn's actions, Tyrion would most likely feel indebted to her. I cannot speak for his house at large, but for Tyrion at least, the phrase "a Lannister always pays his debts" is more than just a fancy sentence. Lady Catelyn then nodded her head appreciatively to Jon with a faint smile of respect, something that vexed him, Arya, Benjen, Theon and Robb, for she had never shown anything but stone-hearted glares at Jon. Robb rubbed his eyes and sighed. Maybe you're right, maybe the Kingslayer and the Imp will free Sansa, but then again maybe they won't. There are too many variables for it to go one way or the other. It's with the gods now, along with whatever fate, chance, luck and chaos get tangled up in this mess. Until Sansa is safely back with us we simply cannot know. Instead, I wish to focus on what I do know, Robb declared sternly. I know Jaime Lannister was my prisoner and now he's gone. I know that you have weakened our position. I know that you have committed treason. I know what penalty awaits treason. Catelyn's expression went cold and all eyes of grim terror in the hall went to Robb as they waited nervously for his next words. But I also know that you are my mother, so you will not face execution for your crimes. You are a detained prisoner, your chambers will act as your cell and you will be guarded day and night by men of Horlis Mollin's choosing. The rotation of guards assigned to you will be your gaolers, not your sentinels. You will follow their commands, not the other way around. You will be permitted to attend your father's funeral, but beyond that, you are confined to your cell. I will later discuss with Lord Edmure and Arthur Edswain matters of visitation or being allowed to leave your chambers for any reason, Robb declared sternly. Furthermore, on the matter of my sister. If your ploy with the Kingslayer actually by some miracle pays off and she is returned to us, or if my armies manage to recapture the Kingslayer on the field or rescue Sansa themselves, then when the war is over, the possibility of a pardon may be approached. But know this, Lady Stark. Any man in my army killed by the Kingslayer or on his command, any decision the Kingslayer makes in Lord Tywin's war councils that weakens us, any harm that befalls Sansa now that Sir Jaime's safety is no longer at our mercy, any negative ramifications of your treason will be held against you when the time for your final judgment on this matter comes at the end of the war. Is your king heard? Robb asked angrily. He is, Catelyn replied, bowing her head remorsefully. Robb wanted so desperately to run down from the dais, wrap his arms around her and beg her forgiveness and give her comfort for her father's passing, but he would not. At the very least he would comfort her with some small words. Let it be known, mother, that my greatest hope is that your treason bears fruit and that Sansa's safety will be secured. I know what it is to love so greatly you can think of nothing else, Robb declared, glancing over to Jane. You have endured much grief and pain in this war. Bran's fall, Sansa and Arya's capture, father's execution, the attack on Bran and Rickon, and now your father's passing. Know that I grieve your loss with you, Robb said gently. Thank you, she replied, managing a smile. There are more matters I wish to discuss in private with you, mother, and with all the rest of my family. Of this and other things. Steward, call an end. Arthur Edswain slammed his staff on the floor and shouted the dismissal, and River Lords, Vale Knights and Northerners alike moved towards the doors. On their way out, many of the nobles stopped past Lady Catelyn, giving her well-wishing words of comfort and greeting her. The great Jon, no respecter of proprieties, lifted her off her feet in a strong embrace. When all words were done, the great hall of Riverrun was empty save for 3 Starks, 3 Tullys, 3 Direwolves, 4 Westerlings, 2 Spicers, a Snow and an Ironbreaker. Robb had given each of them glances and gestures to stay behind, ensuring them that Robb counted them all as family. Catelyn glanced at Jane, then at her brothers and sister and her mother and her uncle. The Lady of Winterfell was vexed and confused. Robb looked to Benjen, leading him with his eyes to his mother and his queen, trying to subtly ask if she had been informed of what had happened, but Benjen shook his head. Fuck. My lady, sirs, are you new to my son's cause? She finally asked. New, said Reynold, a bit nervously, but fierce in our courage and firm in our loyalties, as I hope to prove to you, my lady. Robb held his head high and spoke with pride. Mother. May I present the Lady Sybil, the wife of Lord Goran Westerling of the Crag. Robb gestured to Lady Sybil, who came forward with a solemn mien. Her husband was one of those we took captive in the Whispering Wood. The words Robb spoke caused Catelyn's eyebrows to perk up, but she remained cordial thus far. Jon, Theon and Arya's expressions seemed to be in anticipation of an imminent combustion coming from Lady Catelyn, which Rob too expected but was not in fear of. Sir Rolf Spicer, Lady Sybil's brother. He was Castellan at the Crag when we took it. Sir Rolf inclined his head respectfully. The children of Lord Goran and Lady Sybil. Sir Reynold Westerling. Elenia. Rolam Westerling, my second squire. Reynold bowed, Elenia curtsied and Rolam began to kneel but quickly switched to a bow when he noticed no one else had done so. The honor is mine, Catelyn said with a light bow of her head, but she still seemed confused, still not having worked out what had happened. Her eyes then fixated on Jane, the crowned woman sitting next to Rob on the dais. Catelyn's frown grew deeper and her eyes widened a bit. It seemed she had finally put it all together and was just waiting for Rob to say it aloud. Mother, Rob began, I have the great honor to present to you, Jane Westerling, my lady wife and queen. Jane seemed petrified as she sat in anticipation of Catelyn's words, but Rob was fearless in his love for her. What came next was an open-mouthed gawk of confusion and genuine horror as Lady Catelyn's mouth quivered in failed attempts to speak. Eventually, Catelyn forced a smile. I have a new daughter, she said, though rather stiffly. Be welcome to our hall and hearth. It was clear Jane was not convinced of Catelyn's sincerity, but she seemed at the very least relieved to hear kind words rather than the angered scoldings of an enraged mother. Thank you, my lady. I shall be a good and true wife to Rob, I swear. And as wise a queen as I can. Rob's mother widened her eyes and tightened her lips and forced a smile when Jane mentioned the word queen. Lady Sybil spoke up. We are honored to be joined to House Stark, my lady, but we are also very weary. We have come a long way in a short time. Perhaps we might retire once more to our chambers, so you may visit with your son. That would be best. The steward will escort you back to your accommodations, Rob agreed, noticing how tired Rolam and Elenia looked. Sybil looked at Jane and began to frown when she noticed her daughter wasn't moving. Jane. Aren't you coming? She asked, arching an eyebrow. No, mother, you go on ahead. I'd like to stay here, Jane asserted, bringing a smile to Rob's face. You're welcome to stay too, Reynold. You as well if you wish it, Sir Rolf, Rob asserted. Can I stay too? Asked Rolam. I'm your squire. Rob laughed. But I'm not in need of squiring just now. Oh. His Grace has gotten along for 16 years without you, Rolam. He will survive a few hours more, I think, said Reynold playfully, putting his hands over his little brother's shoulders and ushering him off to follow his mother and sister. You too, Arya. It's time for the grown-ups to have a long talk, Benjen declared. I'm not even tired. It's not like I've been riding anywhere, Arya asserted stubbornly. So you don't have to go to bed, but you can't stay here, said Jon, playfully nudging Arya under the chin. Off you go, Rob commanded with a smile. Arya groaned and rolled her eyes. Come on, Nymeria, she grumbled as she reluctantly left the hall with Rolam, her wolf following close behind. I'll show you to the steward, Lord Edmure volunteered. You are most kind, said Lady Sybil. When the hall was empty, those that remained came close to the dais and reshuffled with Benjen, the Blackfish and Catelyn standing on one side while Jon, Theon and Reynold assembled on the other next to Ghost. You are very lovely, lady, forgive me, Queen Jane, Catelyn said kindly. Thank you, Jane said with a smile. Forgive me, but, your father, Rob's mother began, unsure how to continue her sentence, but all knew what she wished to say. My father is of the sworn bannerman to House Lannister. He has served Lord Tywine for many years, Jane declared, not shying away from the truth. Jason Mallister captured him in the Whispering Wood and has been holding him at Seaguard for ransom. Of course, I'll bring him here and have him freed, though he may not wish to join me. It is my hope that after explaining the situation to him he might be swayed to our side, Rob explained. My lord father knows Tywine Lannister's nature and has served him begrudgingly for many years. When he understands the man you are, your grace, he will surely join you, Reynold declared. The crag has been abandoned and all those who remain loyal to us have joined us here in Riverrun, Sir Rolf declared. How many fighting men has the crag contributed? Theon asked with intrigue as he crossed his arms. Rolf glanced over to Rob nervously. 50. A dozen knights. Theon failed to fight back a snicker, resulting in Jon punching him in the shoulder. The men of the crag fought loyally alongside us at Tarbeck and Castamere, the Blackfish asserted. And how did this all come about? Caitlin asked. Later, Mother Rob said sternly, not wishing to deal with his mother's critiques of his union with Jane. Soon Edmure returned, and now in the privacy of his own family, Rob was ready to speak of matters too serious to be addressed publicly. Now that we are all here and in private, Rob said, looking to the closed entrance to the hall. There are things that must be discussed further. Uncle, I wish to speak to you of your battle at the fords, Rob began. Edmure beamed with pride, seeming to not notice Rob's angry expression. Now that you mention it, there are some things I would like to go into greater detail with. For example, our routing of Gregor Clegane at the stone mill. I think we've all heard sufficient of your boasting, nephew, the Blackfish interjected. Edmure was taken aback. Boasting? What do you mean? I mean, said the Blackfish, that you owe his grace your thanks for his forbearance. He played out that mummers farce in front of the court so as not to shame you before your own people. Had it been me, I would have flayed you for your stupidity rather than praising this folly of the fords. My folly saw Harrenhal reclaimed and all the hostages within set free and sent Tywine running back to King's Landing. Uncle. Edmure sounded outraged. What, is no one to win victories but the young wolf? Did I steal some glory meant for you, Rob? Your Grace, John corrected, I see. You took my brother for your king, Lord Edmure, or have you forgotten that as well? How dare you? You of all people deign to speak to a man of House Tully in such a manner? Is the whole of Riverrun? Edmure asked angrily. Edmure, please, Caitlin said softly, tempering her brother's anger, once again uncharacteristically being kind towards John. When Benjen was left in command of our armies in the Riverlands, he was commanded to hold the armies in place. Did he give you any different orders when he left to reinforce the north? Asked the Blackfish. Benjen commanded me to hold Riverrun until he or the king returned. I held it and blooded Tywine's nose. So you did, said Rob. But a bloody nose won't win the war, will it? Did you ever think to ask yourself why we remained in the west so long after Oxcross? You knew I did not have enough men to threaten Lannisport or Casterly Rock. Why, there were other castles, gold, cattle. You think we stayed for plunder? Rob was incredulous. Uncle, I wanted Lord Tywine to come west. We were all horsed, Sir Brynden said. The Lannister host was mainly foot. We planned to run Lord Tywine a merry chase up and down the coast, then slip behind him to take up a strong defensive position athwart the Gold Road, at a place my scouts had found where the ground would have been greatly in our favor. If he had come at us there, he would have paid a grievous price. But if he did not attack, he would have been trapped in the west, 1,000 leagues from where he needed to be. All the while we would have lived off his land, instead of him living off ours. Our skin changers could have seen the old lion coming before his scouts could even spot us. He'd never have known where we were until we were already gone. We'd know every step he made while he was chasing phantoms, John explained, scratching Ghost's head. Stannis and Renly were about to fall upon King's Landing, Rob said. They might have rid us of Joffrey, the Queen and the Imp in one red stroke. Then we might have been able to make a peace, the Blackfish added. Edmure looked from the Blackfish to Rob and glanced at John in between and then to Benjen. You never told me. No, I did not, Benjen admitted. That was my folly. I beg the king's forgiveness for it. Rob nodded, feeling no ill will to his paternal uncle. I was in a rush to reach Moat Cailin before the Ironborn attacked, and even with my haste I did not make it. But make no mistake, Edmure, I did tell you to hold Riverrun. What part of that command did you fail to comprehend? When you stopped Lord Tywine on the Red Fork, said the Blackfish, you drove him into Renly's siege camp where he captured the Tyrell girl that Renly wedded. Now the Lannisters have entered into a non-aggression pact with Tywine in exchange for her safety. Renly will now be forced to choose between fighting his brother and fighting us. Edmure looked ill. I never meant, never, Rob. You must let me make amends. I will lead the van in the next battle. Rob wondered if Edmure was desiring amends or glory. Either way, Edmure now understood his folly and hopefully would learn from it. Rob signed and nodded his head. The next battle, he mused. Well, that will be soon enough. Are all preparations for Lord Hoster's funeral ready? Yes, Your Grace, Edmure declared. Tomorrow we will have the funeral and properly lay Lord Hoster to rest. Later that night in the Great Hall I will officially inaugurate you, uncle, as the first Warden and Lord Prince of the Kingdom of the Trident. I take it my cousin Lord Robert Arryn has not travelled for the funeral? Rob inquired. Nor his mother Edmure confirmed solemnly. Very well. Nonetheless, I will have my cousin elevated to Warden and Lord Prince of the Kingdom of the Mountains and the Vale. A raven will be sent to inform him of his elevation, Rob declared. After the funeral, we will begin discussing our next move in the war effort, Rob declared. With that, Rob dismissed the private council and personally escorted his mother back to her chambers where they discussed the nature of his marriage to Jane. After some talking and some arguing, he bid her good night, and as the evening rolled in, Rob returned to Jane and Grey Wind, waiting for him in his own chambers. Chapter 50, The Changing of the Ways. Chapter text. All the highborns amongst the Northmen, the River Lords and the Vale Knights gathered on the bank of the Red Fork, with most of the foot soldiers of the three kingdoms and common people from the castle, nearby villages, and the refugees from the crag standing on the bank adjacent from them. Those among them with black clothing in their possession chose to wear them, and some of the Riverrun household assembled across the water had torn their garments in a sign of mourning for their liege Lord Hoster. At the far back of the small folk across the bank were some of the giants who came to watch the funeral. Only one of the giants was on the same side of the bank as the nobles, the leader of the giants, Mag the Mighty as he was called, who stood at the back with the lesser knights and small lords, not because of low status but because he was immensely bigger than all the rest. A lifetime ago, Petter would have been among them at the back, probably so far back even the giant would stand in front of him. Instead, Petter was at the front, equal with the highest of the assembled nobles. More than that, he stood apart from the other nobles and was among the royal party. He stood with the Starks, the Tullys, the Bastard Snow, the Greyjoy boy who called himself Ironbreaker, the Westerlings, the Spicers, and the two free maidens betrothed to Edmure and Benjen. Baelish and Sir Rolf Spicer were standing furthest away from the three sergeant direwolves who growled and snarled whenever either of them came near, none of them liking the smell of the two men. The three wolves were lined up shoulder to shoulder, the red-eyed ghost in front of his master called Snow, Nymeria in front of the little Arya, and the burly Grey Wind in front of Queen Jane, who stroked his head and scratched behind his ears a few times during the ceremony. Rather than a monstrous pony-sized wolf, Petter was accompanied by the fair Lady Catelyn, who was dressed in a long black gown and cloak as most others were. Not far behind her were the two guards from Winterfell who acted as her captors since she was still a prisoner for her treasonous act. Petter had not yet approached the young wolf, waiting for Catelyn and Edmure to sing his praises and for Arya and Benjen to speak of his role in saving her before revealing himself to the boy, and since Petter had not been executed yet, he assumed the boy did not believe him to be a deceptive infiltrator. Petter held Catelyn's gloved hand through the funeral procession, comforting her in her grief. How sweet it was for Petter to hold her once again, and how grateful he was to Hoster for dying as he did to make such an interaction possible. Petter would never forget the glorious look of suffering on the old cunt Hoster's face as he lay dying, and now the shriveled husk was being displayed before him. The embalming efforts of the Maester had kept Lord Hoster somewhat preserved for the many weeks it took for the young wolf and his host to return east from the Westerlands, but Lord Hoster's corpse had become stiff, colorless, and was already starting to decompose. They laid Lord Hoster in a slender wooden boat, clad in shining silver armor, plate and mail. His cloak was spread beneath him, rippling blue and red. His surcoat was divided blue and red as well. A trout, scaled in silver and bronze, crowned the crest of the Greedilm they placed beside his head. On his chest they placed a painted wooden sword, his fingers curled about its hilt. Mail gauntlets hid his wasted hands, and made him look almost strong again. His massive oak and iron shield was set by his left side, his hunting horn to his right. The rest of the boat was filled with driftwood and kindling and scraps of parchment, and stones to make it heavy in the water. His banner flew from the prow, the leaping trout of Riverrun. 7 were chosen to push the funereal boat to the water, in honor of the 7 faces of God. Rob was one, Lord Hoster's liege king and grandson. With him were the Lords Bracken, Blackwood, Vance, and Mallister, Sir Mark Piper and Sir Desmond Grull. The boy king felt he had to be part of the funeral ceremony as he had been the one to command the delay of the funeral so that he might attend. Petter surmised that if not King Rob, the 7th position would have gone to the likes of Edmure, the Blackfish or Arthur Edswain. Perhaps even Petter might have been asked, what a laugh that would have been. When they carried Hoster's desiccating corpse past on their shoulders, Petter held Kat's hand tight and feigned sadness, but on the inside, he was dancing with joy like a drunken monkey. The seven launched Lord Hoster from the river bank, wading through the water as they descended into the river. Jason Mallister and Titus Blackwood, at the prow, stood chest-deep in the river to guide it on its way. The seven stood in the shallows of the river's edge and watched for a time as the tides of the Red Fork claimed Lord Hoster's vessel and ushered him downstream. A morning mist hung over the water, as thin as gossamer. The Blackfish watched as the boat drifted until finally, he decided it was time. Now the old knight declared. Beside him, armed with a bow and quiver, was Prince Edmure, or rather the lord who would be the ruling prince of the Kingdom of the Trident by the day's end when the king had officially inaugurated him. The Lord Prince knocked an arrow to his bowstring. His squire held a brand to its point. Edmure waited until the flame caught, then lifted the great bow, drew the string to his ear, and let fly. With a deep thrum, the arrow sped upward. Caitlin followed its flight with her eyes and heart until it plunged into the water with a soft hiss, well astern of Lord Hoster's boat. Edmure cursed softly. The wind, he said, pulling a second arrow. Again. The brand kissed the oil-soaked rag behind the arrowhead, the flames went licking up, Edmure lifted, pulled, and released. High and far the arrow flew. Too far. It vanished in the river a dozen yards beyond the boat, its fire winking out in an instant. A flush was creeping up Edmure's neck, red as his beard. By all the gods, it was becoming impossible for Petter to hold back his laughter, but he managed to keep a sad and solemn expression painted on. Small snickers and smirks came from young Rolam Westerling and Arya Stark, Lady Sybil flicking Rolam behind the ear and Benjen shaking Arya's shoulder in a reprimanding manner. Even Ion Breaker let out a small laugh that he tried his best to disguise as a cough but forced himself silent with pursed lips when Snow gave him a hard glare. Once more Edmure commanded, taking a third arrow from the quiver. "Let me, my lord," Prince Sir Brynden offered. "I can do it," Edmure insisted. He let them light the arrow, jerked the bow up, took a deep breath and drew back the arrow. For a long moment, he seemed to hesitate while the fire crept up the shaft, crackling. Finally, he released. The arrow flashed up, and finally curved down again, falling, and hissing past the boat. A narrow miss, no more than a handspan, and yet a miss. "The others take it," the Lord Prince swore. The boat continued down the river and would soon drift out of range. Wordless, Edmure thrust the bow at his uncle. Edmure stood at Kat's side adjacent to Petter. When Edmure looked over to Petter, he gave the prince a respectful nod that said, "You tried your best," which Edmure seemed to appreciate. Swiftly Sir Brynden said, he knocked an arrow, held it steady for the brand, drew and released before Petter was quite sure that the fire had caught, but as the shot rose, he saw the flames trailing through the air, a pale orange pennon. With this perhaps being the last chance, the entire Red Fork seemed to hold its breath as the arrow went up and down it came, striking the boat, setting the boat aflame. Caitlin held Petter's hand with her right and Edmure's hand with her left, then Sir Brynden came to Edmure's side and held his shoulder affectionately. Caitlin began to whimper and turned to bury her head in Petter's shoulder, causing his heart to flutter with joy but also ache for the pain Cat was in. Edmure rested his hand on his sister's shoulder and Petter reached his arm around her and held her close. "I've got you," Petter whispered to her affectionately. As happy as it made Petter to hold Caitlin so close, he wished she did not waste her heart and her tears on a repugnant creature like her father. Despite his resplendent and grandiose persona, he was cruel, selfish and ambitious and was the whole reason they were never allowed to be together. Petter would never admit it aloud, but he was overjoyed to see the old fucker's withered corpse cook on the river and the smoke from the flaming boat rise into the air. Petter was also thankful for the absence of Lady Lysa, despite Petter having sent letters asking her to come to Riverrun for her father's funeral himself, which she turned down for fear of Sweet Robin's safety. Petter originally thought that it would mean the world to Cat if he could orchestrate Lysa to come home for their father's funeral, but in the end he was happy for her absence. Had she been there she'd have made a scene, either feigning tears and wails louder than Caitlin's to steal Petter's attention from her sister, or would have had an aggressive tantrum and accused Cat of trying to steal Petter. Rob remained knee-deep in the water on the river's edge alongside Lord Blackwood, Mallister and Sir Desmond, while Bracken, Piper and Vance had left the water and watched from the very edge of the bank. Just as the boat was almost gone out of view, The entire thing was consumed in bright orange flame and collapsed in on itself, sinking into the water. Hoster Tully was now finally gone in all his forms, in life, in body, in presence. It felt to Pete like a chafing shackle that had always held him back was finally removed. Now there was nothing left of the old lord but a drowned, charred corpse. The weight of his armor would carry Lord Hoster down to rest in the soft mud of the riverbed, in the watery halls where the Tullys held eternal court, with schools of fish their last attendants. And if the gods would ever be good to Pete, then one day a fisherman will sail down the Red Fork, bear his ass over the side of his boat and drop a heavy sinking shit into the water that would float down and land in Lord Hoster's mouth. When the boat sunk into the water, the young King Rob hung his head and exhaled before climbing out of the water. Lord Tytos patted the young king on the shoulder and spoke kind words to him out of Pete's earshot, and when Lord John Osbracken noticed this, he went to pat the king on the shoulder and speak words to him, trying to match Blackwood. Lord Tytos turned away and rolled his eyes, seeming disgruntled at the pettiness his rival would lower himself to. Cat eventually turned from Pete and embraced her brother Edmure and reached past him to hold Sir Brinden's hand. Edmure the Blackfish said softly. The new Lord of Riverrun turned to face his uncle, his stern expression probably expecting reprimands for his failed shots, but Pete could see nothing but love and sadness in the Blackfish's eyes. The day my own Lord Father went down river, Hoster missed as well. It is no disgrace. Edmure lowered his head and nodded sadly before reaching out and hugging his uncle. Edmure then looked out upon the Red Fork with one arm around Sir Brinden and one around Cat and one of Cat's arms around Pete, the four of them woven together by their arms locked around each other. All Pete ever wanted, all Hoster never let him have, and that made him feel victorious. The young wolf came close and was attended by his two squires, receiving his cloak from his older squire, Oliver Free, who put it over his shoulders, and receiving his crown from his younger squire, Roland Westerling, who handed it to the king. The boy King Rob looked down at his crown in his hands, brooding in contemplation before donning it upon his brow, his expression still sad. His queen and his wolf attended him next, the grey beast sniffing his hand and the crowned Westerling girl comforting him by wrapping her arms around him tenderly. They rested their foreheads together, Jane asking if Rob was all right and the king assuring her he was. Rob was not the only one receiving a woman's comfort, with Edmure leaving his family to embrace his betrothed, Roslyn Free, and Benjen Stark holding hands and speaking with Tyta Free. The White Wolf was gazing across the Red Fork to a cluster of physicians that had arrived with the king's host. One near the front, a young dark-haired girl, gave the subtlest wave to the famed young warrior of the Northmen that made him smile gently. Pete's attention was then drawn by the king and queen's approach, which made Baelish the slightest bit nervous, for he'd never spoken with the young wolf before. When the two came close, their attention was on Lady Catelyn standing next to Pete. Rob took his mother silently into his arms and embraced her. Lord Hoster looked as noble as a king, my Lady Jane said kind and affectionately. Would that I had been given the chance to know him. And I to know him better, added Rob. He would have wished that too, said Catelyn. There were too many leagues between Riverrun and Winterfell. King Rob's eyes then went from his mother to Pete, their first interaction. Your Grace, Pete said respectfully with a bow. Lord Pete Baelish, at your service, my king. Well met, Lord Baelish, Rob said cordially but coldly. It was clear from his expression he did not trust Baelish. I have heard your praises from my mother, uncles and sister. Thank you for rescuing Arya, Rob said, reaching out his hand. An honor to serve. Though I am sorry I could not do more for your father before his murder, Pete declared with affectionate emotion in his voice. Catelyn held Pete's hand once again. Indeed, said Rob, his eyes focused deeply on Lord Baelish. I would have words with you later, Lord Baelish, there is much with you that I need to discuss, Rob declared. Pete bowed. I am your man, your grace. The king and his queen then left Lady Catelyn to do their rounds with the lords and knights, receiving their condolences and exchanging kind words. The young Westerling queen was a fast-growing favored in Riverrun. Those who had come with Rob from the Westerlands were already taken with her kindness and charm, while those whom she did not know were stiff and formal with her, but Pete noticed them warm to her as she spoke. Baelish had no intelligence on the Westerlings and the Spicers nor their motives, and had his associates in the castle subtly observe them and gauge them for any deception. If the Westerling girl was in fact a deceiver loyal to Tywin, then she was a skilled manipulator who knew how to charm and bend people. But the girl seemed sincere and sweet enough to Pete, but also shrewd and unfettered and resistant to her mother and uncle for some reason. "I am glad you were here with me for this," Kat said gently as she looked at him with her tear-reddened eyes. "I am always here for you," Petter assured her, bringing a smile to her face. Kat took a gentle breath through her nose as she looked out across the water of the Red Fork. "I know things weren't the same after the incident with you and Brandon. But, Father only sent you away to make things less complicated. He truly did love you like a son," Kat said. "And I loved him equal to my own father," Petter said truthfully, for he had no regard for his own father. The smallest of small lords he was called by the knights and lords of the Vale, the son of a hedge knight and the grandson of a sellsword. Petter's father had dreams but no ambitions to make them realities. He dwelled on his small bit of land and his keep on the smallest of the fingers, wishing he was more but never doing anything about it. The closest he ever came to climbing into power was befriending Lord Hoster during the War of the Ninepenny Kings and later cashing in that friendship to make Petter Hoster's ward. Petter's father hoped his son could drag their house up in status like an ox dragging a plough by the yoke. And just as Petter's father wished, he rose in power, climbing to the station of Master of Coin on King Robert's small council, but luckily his father died before he could see his growth in status. And Kat. I know this is probably not the best time to speak of this. But for years I have wished to tell you, I am truly very sorry about what happened all those years ago. I never meant to embarrass you or upset you. In my own mind, I thought my actions were protecting you, Petter explained, and Kat nodded in understanding. I know. I was very upset when you fought Brandon and very upset long after that. It broke my heart to see you two fight and I worried you might die. However, in the years since we parted ways I have heard the stories of Brandon's exploits with women. But believe me when I say that there was more to him than that. He would have grown out of it in time had he lived, Kat tried to explain. Petter nodded, pretending to agree with Kat, but he knew deep down there was nothing more to Brandon Stark than the debaucherous brute that he presented himself as. Poor Kat had crafted a perfect image of the Stark lordling in her head, one that had romanticized itself in her mind, untainted by the truth since Wild Brandon had been too dead to ever disappoint her expectations. So am I forgiven? Petter asked. Kat took Petter's face into her hands. You brought my Arya back to me. You are forgiven and you are loved, Kat asserted. By all the gods, Petter could have kissed her there and then, but he would not, for it was not the time. But eventually, one day, he knew he would win Kat's heart. Caitlin gave Petter one more kind embrace before leaving his side to receive comfort from young Arya and her wolf and to grieve with the Blackfish. The funeral dissolved shortly afterwards. The crowds on both sides of the river went their own ways, ambling away from the river. Most of the nobles were on their way back to Riverrun, as was Petter. When Kat was ready to leave, she went to the pair of Stark guards and nodded to them, surrendering herself to be taken back to her chamber. The guards were kind and respectful to her, not only out of respect for her grief but also because she was their Lady of Winterfell. Back at Riverrun, a somber mood overtook the castle. Those among the nobles of the Three Kingdoms who were old enough to have fought in Robert's War were gathered in the courtyard, sharing old war stories of Hoster with cups of wine. Others, servants, knights and lordlings and ladies who did not know Lord Hoster very well or at all, traded simple words of respect for the late Tully Lord. Good man, that Hoster. A brave hero he was. He had many adventures in his youth. When the Mad King's tyranny grew too cruel, he had the courage to stand up and say no. Good man, very good man. Petter was exhausted with all the praise Hoster was receiving but unable to escape it. When Lord Baelish found a servant dressed in black carrying a tray of wine cups, Petter helped himself to one. Petter then spent his time perusing, watching, listening and learning. Trying to understand these lords and knights of the Three Kingdoms, which ones he could use, which ones he could manipulate and which ones to avoid. Petter had welded himself to Robb Stark's side, and if he was going to rise in power, he needed to know which lords and knights were best to climb upon. Petter exchanged words with Lord Yohn Royce, whom he knew from his time in the Vale, and met with Sir Stephen Free, whom Petter had met once or twice while growing up in the Riverlands. It was the Northerners he required help making inroads with, but they would come in time. After a short while, the king's young squire Rolam Westerling came to Lord Baelish, claiming that his Grace King Robb wished to see him in his chamber. Petter felt both surprise and intrigue. He recalled the young wolf wished to meet with him later, but he did not realize that later was so soon. While Baelish was caught a little off guard, he did not mind and was interested to hear what King Robb had to say, and so Lord Baelish put his wine cup down on a passing tray and followed the Westerling boy through the castle. The king's chamber was through a pair of double doors with 2 Stark guards on either side. Through the doors, Lord Baelish saw the king sitting at a desk by the window, his queen standing over him. His bronze and iron crown of swords and runes had been set down on a drawer near the door, and his wolf lay on the ground near his bed, but his head perked up and he began to gently growl when Petter entered the chamber. "I'll come find you later," Robb promised his queen, taking her hand and kissing her palm. With a smile, Jane left her king's side and made for the door. "Come on, Rolam, let's leave the king and Lord Baelish to speak in peace," she said as she approached the door. Robb quickly noticed Grey Wind's growls and snarls at Petter. "Could you take him too?" "Perhaps a leg of mutton will calm him," Robb suggested. Jane nodded compliantly. "Grey Wind, come here, boy," she said gently, and the wolf responded to her, following her out but snarling at Petter as he walked past. The doors closed behind them and Petter was left alone with the young Stark king. "The wolf seems to respond well to your queen," Baelish acknowledged, and Robb smiled and nodded in response. "He does. A while ago she was very nervous around Grey Wind, and for understandable reasons. He'd killed a knight she had known from childhood during the storming of the crag. But over time she has warmed to him," Robb explained. Robb then shifted his focus from the door through which his wolf and wife had left and then looked to Petter. "Though it seems Grey Wind does not like you," he pointed out almost accusatively. "No, I suppose he doesn't," Baelish agreed. Robb leaned back in his chair and glanced over to Baelish, studying his face before returning his attention to his desk. "Direwolves have very keen senses. They notice things that others do not," Robb explained, his eyes on a piece of parchment he was writing. Baelish shrugged. "Or perhaps your wolf has spent too much time on the battlefield, perhaps the taste of human blood makes him hungry," Petter suggested. "That may be the case for a common beast, but not with a Stark's direwolf. The skin changer bond is an ancient and powerful magic beyond the simple bond between men and their pets. We wargs put a part of ourselves in our direwolves and they put a part of themselves in us. Grey Wind may not have the wisdom of a maester, but he is no dumb beast driven by instinct alone. He understands who is friend and who is foe, and he understands what is food and what is not. I have entered his mind and I can sense his emotions. Believe me when I tell you his snaps and growls are not to do with hunger, but because he does not trust you. He feels like you are hiding something. When he is around I can sense it through him sometimes," Stark declared, continuing to write on the piece of paper without looking at Petter. "For what reason would I need to hide something?" Lord Baelish asked. The auburn-headed son of Eddard looked at him, his eyes more cautious and more suspicious of Petter than his father's had ever been. "I'd have you tell me that." Littlefinger thought long and hard before finally giving an answer. "Maybe what I'm trying and failing to hide from your direwolf is my sincere and unyielding hatred for direwolves," Petter explained. Robb put down the quill he was writing with and turned in his chair to face Baelish. "Any particular reason?" "Do my family's wolves upset you?" asked Robb. "They remind me of the first direwolf I had the pleasure of meeting, long ago," Petter explained, bringing confusion and intrigue to the Stark boy. "I'm sure you've heard at one point or another the story of how I challenged your father's brother Brandon to a duel for your dear mother's hand, yes?" Robb nodded cautiously. "I've heard something to that effect." Petter smirked as the memory of the deep cuts of Brandon's blade burned upon the scars beneath the black funerary garments that he wore. "Well, Brandon was not alone during that duel. He had 3 spectators in support of him, your mother, Edmure and his direwolf," Petter explained. "A big and scary brown wolf with yellow eyes, larger and burlier than Robb's Grey Wind." "Longfang," Robb said softly and somberly. As Robb said the wolf's name, a shudder went down Baelish's spine. "Yes, that was the wolf. Throughout the duel, your uncle and I clashed blades and his wolf snarled and barked viciously at me. At one point when I was knocked down, before I got the chance to get back up, the wolf padded towards me. I could see in its eyes that it wished to kill me. Only by Brandon's command to it leave off and return to its position." The humiliating and terrifying ordeal haunted Petter still. "In the fortnight after the duel, I often had nightmares about Brandon's wolf coming to me while I was weak and eating me. So yes, I do feel a deep fear and hatred for direwolves but do my best to hide it, Petter explained. Rob looked away sadly for a moment. My apologies, Lord Baelish. That was insensitive of me, Rob said. Baelish shook his head. Think nothing of it. Your wolves sensed deceit and you did the smart thing and investigated it, Baelish said, throwing the young wolf a bone and successfully subverting his interpretation of the deceit the direwolves smelled. All he had told about Brandon's direwolf was true, but he had not developed a phobia towards all wolves because of it, but Rob didn't need to know that. There was a lot Rob didn't need to know. If you don't mind me asking, Your Grace, but what happened to the wolf? Longfang, I mean. Petter had heard rumors but wanted the young Stark's confirmation of it. Rob exhaled sadly before he spoke. He went south with my uncle and his retinue to challenge Rhaegar Targaryen and rescue my aunt Lyanna. When they were betrayed and captured by the Mad King, he had Longfang speared and slain by his men. Afterwards, the Mad King ordered Longfang cut into pieces, arms, legs, head, tail and the torso cut into 3 chunks. Each of Longfang's body parts was then displayed on pikes from the battlements of Maegor's Holdfast. His bones were retrieved after the sack of King's Landing and now lie with his master and his kin in the crypts beneath Winterfell, Rob explained. Home. I wish I could say I am sorry to hear that, but as I have said before, I did not care for that wolf, Petter said honestly. If memory serves, your father had a wolf too, didn't he? Petter inquired, trying to build a conversation with the young king he wished to befriend and earn the trust of. He did. Frost his name was, but he died fighting alongside my father at the Trident. Most Starks have had direwolf companions, the Walkbond calls to us. There are many direwolves in the Wolfswood North Winterfell. Sometimes a wolf mother will leave a pup to be found by a Stark. A gift of color, Rob explained. After a moment, Rob stood up from his desk and went to the closest of a pair of sofas facing one another by the crackling fire of the chamber's hearth. Please, Rob invited, motioning to the sofa across from him. Petter took a seat and faced the serious young Stark boy. Lord Baelish. You saved my sister Arya from the Lannisters. My mother claims you were the one who first warned my Aunt Lysa of the Lannisters' assassination of Jon Arryn and advised her to flee to the Vale and seek the help of my mother. You have the support and the confidence of my mother, my uncle and my aunt. By all rights you should be regarded amongst my strongest allies, Rob declared, though his face remained serious and concerned. I sense there is more to that, Petter suggested. Young Rob looked to Lord Baelish for a silent and stern moment before speaking. You were in King's Landing when Robert died and Joffrey was crowned king. You were there when my father was arrested and when he was killed, and then you left King's Landing and fled to the Vale without a care in the world, and for the life of me I cannot fathom why the Lannisters would let that happen. I've heard your story from Arya, my mother and Ed Muir, how my father asked you to feign betraying him so you could protect my sisters, but they are all going off what was told to them by you. You are the only living witness, the only source we have for what happened. So why the fuck should I trust that you're not lying? Rob asked. Petter could have given any number of excuses or answers to try and convince the boy of his sincerity. Remind him of all he'd done to help Arya and bring the Vale into his fold. Tell him heartfelt stories of his youth with the Tullys and how loyal he was to them. But Petter felt that he would need to try a new tact to win over this young man. Littlefinger smiled, mischievously. That is exactly right, you shouldn't trust me. Petter's response seemed to disarm King Rob as his expression shifted to vexation. I shouldn't trust you. Rob reiterated. No, of course not. Not yet at least. If you did trust me then I would have advised you not to, Petter explained. Why? Do you have a death wish, my lord? Rob asked, threateningly. Petter smacked his lips and shook his head, disappointed in Rob's response. Your Grace, please. Jumping straight from distrust to execution. That seems more in line with the thematics of the Mad King and Joffrey than your own. Rob's eyes began to peer, displeasure at being associated with either Aerys or Joffrey. While here in Riverrun, waiting for your return, I've heard your lords and knights talk about the likes of Walder Free and Roose Bolton. I highly doubt you trust them the way you do some of your other bannermen, but that is not to say you'd just execute them out of hand. No. But Walder Free and Roose Bolton are sworn to me and their men have fought for me in battle and won victories for me, Rob retorted. Exactly. And I have not. That is why you should not trust me. Yes, I brought your sister back to you, but for all you know the Lannisters ordered me to bring her to you in a gambit to gain your trust. If you are to trust me, then I must prove my loyalty to you. Robb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and studied Baelish's face. What is this? Some kind of trick? A form of manipulation far beyond my understanding? Robb asked. In a way Robb was right, but he was also wrong, for Petter truly was on the Stark boy's side and everything Petter was saying was for his benefit. On the contrary, this is my way of ensuring that you are never manipulated. I am a schemer, Your Grace, that I will not lie about, and I am not the only one. Many will try to use it for their own gains, they will lie to your face to gain your trust. Your father trusted me, and then he trusted other men like me. He trusted Pycelle, Varys and Janos Slynt, and they made him suffer for it. I will not make the same mistake with you. You must be a cautious man, Baelish explained. Robb seemed utterly baffled and confused. Why are you telling me this? Why would you want me not to trust you if you're on my side? Robb asked. It's not about me being on your side. It's about you not knowing who I am. You've only just met me. You do not know me. You have no reason to trust me. You must never let anyone decide what you know. Never let anyone think for you, especially never men like me. I need you to know these things, Baelish explained. Why? Why help me in such a way that is bound to limit your own power over me? Robb asked, his frustration growing. Because I need you to win. When this war began, there were a number of kings to choose from that I might rise through supporting. I will be frank, Your Grace, among the kings on the option to choose from as a patron, you were not naturally my first choice, nor my second, perhaps not even my third, Baelish explained. Really? Asked Robb, lifting his eyebrows. Petter shrugged with a smug look on his face. Can you blame me, Your Grace? The ideal king to support would be the one with the most power to reward me when the fighting has ended. If I chose Joffrey, Renly or even Stannis, then my loyalty could be rewarded with any gift or station in all the 7 kingdoms. But you're not even interested in all the 7 kingdoms. The ceiling of your ambitions is but 3/7 of what was commanded by King Robert and the Targaryens before him. Furthermore, when the war is over and all the dust settles, your desired kingdom will be very hard to maintain. The Riverlands is open to the Westerlands, the Crown Lands and the Reach. Your borders will be constantly open to attack, and whatever southern regimes rise from the ashes of this war will no doubt challenge your authority. It will be a long time before your power is stabilized. Robb smirked. Sorry to disappoint you, Robb said, jokingly. So come on then, why did you choose to support me if I am such a difficult king to favor? Petter gave an exhale of air. Because you are the son of Catelyn Tully, the nephew of Edmure and Lysa. You know my story, that I grew up here in this very castle, raised among Lord Hoster's children, similar to your friend the Greyjoy. The comparison between Baelish and the Greyjoy seemed to soften Robb's expression. They are the only real family I have to me. I love them dearly. But here's the rub, they love you. You are Catelyn's son. If you died and if I supported a king that killed you, Kat's heart would break and I would lose them forever. Your father and I had our differences at first, but he loved your mother very much, which made allies, and by the end, we had trust, even friendship, Petter explained. And that was the truth. Ned did trust Petter despite his warnings not to, and reminded him of that when he put the knife to his throat. I have to support you because I have no other king to support, because your fate is bound to the fate of the people I love. If you are to be the king I stand behind, then I need you to be a great king. I need you to be able to think for yourself, to fend off liars and snakes like me. I need you to have the wisdom of a politician more than a commander, because that's when the real war starts. Taking kingdoms is all well and good, but keeping them is harder, and from what I've heard you don't even have so much as a small council. Petter explained. Robb leaned back on the sofa and raised his head. The small council is a Targaryen construct. No king of winter ever had one, and we've ruled the north for thousands of years, Robb shot back. No king of winter has ever needed one before. But you're not just king in the north anymore, you're king of the Vale and the Riverlands. Kings and wardens of the north had a simpler structure of control, but it will take more than just your father's court to manage 3 different kingdoms, Your Grace. Robb scratched his red bearded chin as he mulled over Baelish's words. If I may give an example. In addition to your sister and Joffrey's head, you also wish to retrieve your father's sword, yes? Petter asked. Ice. Yes. What of it? Well. When you have your father's sword and exchange it for your current one, will you keep the scabbard you have now? Robb smirked and knitted his eyebrows. Of course not. Ice is a massive greatsword, it wouldn't fit in the scabbard of the blade I currently wield, he replied. Exactly. Ice is a bigger sword than the one your sheath was made for. The 3 kingdoms you are building are bigger than the one your father and the old kings in the north ruled. If this new northern kingdom is going to survive, you must be open to the changing of the ways. And like that realization washed over the young wolf, convinced by Baelish's words. Then Robb snickered and shook his head. And let me guess, you believe yourself to be the right man to act as my hand of the king? Robb asked. Of course not. Do you forget all that I say? You should not trust me yet. Not until you know I am worthy of your trust. Robb huffed in exhaustion. You keep saying that. But how do I know when you are worthy of trust? By setting me a goal. Your fear is that I work for the Lannisters and all I have done for you is a ploy to gain your ear and betray you later. To find out if I am loyal or not, you must set me a goal of your own choosing. You must make me prove my worth by hurting or disarming the Lannisters in some way or another, a way that makes me their enemy without question. Make me dependent on you by making me unable to return to the Lannisters' side because I have caused them great harm on your orders. That is when you can begin to trust me, and not a moment before, Petter explained. Robb puzzled once more. And until then? Robb asked. Use me, command me, wield me and my spies to your liking, but do not trust me. Always suspect me and question my motives until you know for certain that I am your loyal servant. Make me your spy master, but make sure I never have any of your own secrets until you know I can keep them. Robb looked to Baelish sternly for a moment before getting up from the sofa, walking over to a table, pouring 2 goblets of wine and returning to his seat across from Petter, handing him one of the goblets. It seems we have much more to discuss, Robb declared as he took a first swill of wine. Petter smiled and then had a long conversation with the boy king lasting hours. By the end of the conversation, it was time for the funerary feast in Lord Hoster's honor and for Edmure's inauguration as Lord Prince. But when they left the room, Baelish felt assured that the seeds were planted. He was on the path to gaining Robb Stark's favor and had also set the foundations for building this boy king up to be more than just a blunt instrument of war. When Baelish was through with him, he'd be an indomitable politician unswayed by the kind of deception that would be invited to someone such as he. Littlefinger needed nothing less from him if Robb Stark was going to carry Baelish to power and prosperity. For better or for worse, Baelish had wagered all he had on the bronze and iron crown of Robb Stark against those of Renly, Stannis, Balon and Joffrey, and if the Stark boy was to win this war for crowns, he needed to know how to play the Game of Thrones. Chapter 51, Many Eyes. Chapter text. The scouring along the coast of the Westerlands had been slim pickings since the Iron Fleet set out from the Isles. They had sent their raiding parties to Windle, Banefort, Fair Castle, Case, Feast Fires and Cricket Hall. Every castle and holdfast and the surrounding villages, farms, towns and taverns were picked clean of wealth and thralls, taking whatever was left. Many fled inland or to Lannisport for shelter, leaving the Ironborn to take what they wanted. They had even sent raiders to scavenge what was left of the abandoned ruins of the crag and Castamere for whatever was left. All the septons they captured were taken to the coast and drowned in the water by a priest, and all the maesters were slaughtered and their libraries burned. When Euron sent the Ironborn and his cell sails to each of the castles to raid, he insisted that Asha and her ship accompany him to sack Fair Castle, Case and Feast Fires. The Fair Isle was a mostly fruitless endeavor, with the meek Lord Farman fleeing south with his ships, his family and his household to Lannisport for shelter. But while the Farmans were gone, Euron made sport of the rest of the island, killing all the remaining fighting men, taking entire families as thralls and sending them back to the Iron Islands on commandeered ships taken from the dockside district of the island. They also burned the septs on the island and looted all houses on the island for their goods. Euron and his devoted followers took it as a great victory, drinking, partying and raping, but Asha felt it a tasteless raid on the weak, unworthy of praise. At Case, they fought the castle garrison led by Sir Gorion Kenning, brother to Lord Terence, who was with Lord Tywin's army. Sigorion declared he would never surrender and died badly, as did his sons. His soldiers and his daughters and wife were stripped, passed around and made use of by Euron and the Ironborn. By the time they reached Feast Fires, there were few Prestus left, with most having fled to Lannisport. Nonetheless, Euron did as he had in the 2 previous raids: take the castle, take the villages, farms and towns, drown the Septons, kill the Maestus and burn the libraries and the septs. The castle of Feast Fires was now smoking, with black clouds of flame escaping through the windows of the stone walls and climbing to the sky. Asher's men, along with most of the Selsales and Ironborn reavers that came with them, were drinking, feasting, laughing, singing, looting and raping. Euron's raiders from his ship the Silence were not doing such things. Instead they were collecting crates of loot from the castle, shackling up lines of women and children to be taken as thralls and standing guard. Asher never saw Euron's odd crew of reavers relax or celebrate, nor did they smile, sleep or even eat or drink. She certainly never heard them speak or even yell or make a sound. When they battled with the Westerlanders, they had no battle cries or even screams of pain when they were injured. They fought and died in silence. Despite the discomforting look of them, the mutes and mongrels were formidable warriors and devoutly loyal to Euron. When Asher sought out her uncle, she walked through the small village just outside the walls of Feast Fires, an unnecessary amount of corpses littering the ground around her. Some Ironborn celebrating, a few dragging women or children out of some houses as they screamed. Eventually, she found a small tavern with a thatched roof that was guarded by Euron's mutes surrounding it. Standing out the front of the door was Euron's brute, Cragorn, a monster of a man, tall and huge, with a shaved head. A large hawk tattooed across his chest, with its talons dripping blood. In addition to his hawk tattoo, he also bore several bands of Valyrian glyphs around his arms and around his neck. Most of Euron's other mutes wore armor and clothing, but now and again whenever she'd see their arms bare or their neck exposed, she saw the same Valyrian glyphs upon all Euron's crew, but Asher knew not what they meant. As Asher approached the entrance to the tavern, Cragorn and the other mutes blocked her path, closing in around her. "Out of my way. I wish to speak with my uncle," Asher commanded, but the mutes were frozen like statues. "I said move," she repeated herself and tried to push past, but they would not let her through. "Have you forgotten who I am? I am the daughter of King Balon Greyjoy and heir to the Iron Islands," Asher asserted. An evil cackle echoed out emanated from within the tavern, unmistakably the voice of Asher's one-eyed uncle. "It's all right. Let her in." Without hesitation, the mutes spread out and returned to their positions around the tavern's permittee. Asher gave a stern glare to Cragorn before storming inside, but the bald tattooed brute was not even paying attention to her. Inside, Euron was sitting on a bench leaning against a long table in the middle of the abandoned tavern, clutching in his hands a raven that he was whispering to. Spread out around the tavern were several cages with ravens inside, taken from the Maestus message coop at Feast Fires. Standing around tending to the ravens were a group of gaunt, beleaguered, robed men with blue lips and pale skin like Euron's, looking as though they were walking corpses swaddled in dirtied robes. They too bore the same Valyrian glyphs tattooed onto them like Euron's mutes, but these 3 men could speak and whispered things to Euron often when they were around. As Euron continued to whisper inane mutterings to the raven, a thin stream of black smoke began to breeze out of his blue lips and into the beak of the bird before Euron released the raven and let it go. The first time Asher had seen such a thing was when Euron had done it at Faircastle with the ravens belonging to House Farman's Maester, and since then, he'd done it again at Case. When Asher first saw the eldritch sorcery performed with the ravens at Faircastle, she panicked and asked her uncle what he was doing. He simply smiled and told her he was expanding his view. Asher knew precious little of magic or sorcery other than what little she'd seen of skin changers in the North campaign. But her uncle seemed immersed in it, but showed it in the subtlest of ways. The way he knew the defenses of the castles and villages before they even made landfall, the way he knew the progress and status of every battle the Iron Fleet was engaged in from Banefort to Cricker Hall before ravens had even reached them. The ravens, the mutes and those in service to him followed his commands as though he had some kind of spell over them, and perhaps he did. Euron released the blackbird and it fluttered its wings and climbed to the rafters of the tavern where many other ravens were perched and looking down at Asher. "Sweet niece," Euron greeted, raising his arms in the air. "Not enjoying the victory celebrations?" Asher grimaced in disdain, hardly seeing such needless carnage as a victory. Asher preferred to raid with honor, slaying her enemies, taking loot and leaving the innocents be to spread her legend and carry the fear of the Ironborn. Euron's wanton violence was reprehensible, focused on torture, rape and murder of enemy warriors and innocents alike. I don't feel like celebrating, Asher replied stiffly. Euron smirked and stood up from the table bench. Well, I hope you change your tune when we take Old Town. That will be a great day in the history of the world. There will be much to rejoice, Euron explained as he took up a goblet of wine from the table and swilled a gulp of it. Asher rolled her eyes, still skeptical of her uncle's ambitions to take Old Town. Forgive me, Asher. Was there something you wanted to talk about? Euron asked. Yes, there was. Now that we've taken Feast Fires, I would like to take my longships and my raiders north. Euron's eyebrows perked up. Well, that's a surprise. What for, might I ask? Your ambition is to plunder the coast of the Westerlands before moving on to the Reach. I expect all our raiders along the coast north of us have fared as well as we have. I would like to volunteer to sail along the coast up to the Iron Man's Bay and tell all our raiding parties to rally with you here before moving on south, Asher explained. Euron nodded and stroked his chin. A very generous offer, but altogether unnecessary. I've already sent some of my eyes to carry messages to our other raiding parties, commanding them to join us at Cricket Hall. They are already on their way, Euron explained. Asher was flummoxed by her uncle's remark. What if they have not completed their raiding yet? What if some of them are still in siege with the castles and holdfasts? We've received no ravens nor riders, Asher remarked. Euron smiled. All our raids along the Lannisters' coastline have been completed. I saw it with my own eyes, Euron explained, pointing to the ravens perched above him. Well, not these ones specifically, but the eyes that have already been sent to watch over the rest of our forces. All the castles, holdfasts, towns, farms, mines and villages we set our sights on have fallen. I witnessed it all myself. Asher stood back in awe and terror. Once again she glanced up at the ravens that glared down at her, the ravens that Euron had spoken hushed foreign words to and breathed black smoke into. Asher's heart began to beat faster as she realized when she looked at the beady black eyes of the ravens, her uncle was looking back at her. When they attacked Fair Castle, Case and Feast Fires, Euron always perfectly predicted how many men their enemies had, where they were positioned, where their weaknesses were, what they were planning. Asher thought he just had spies or informants with them, but now Asher was beginning to realize the true nature of her uncle's knowledge. Asher's eyes then darted to her uncle, who smiled at her. Asher wanted to confront her uncle, ask him how he could see through the ravens, ask him what black magic he was using, but she was too hesitant to speak of such things. Nevertheless, I would still like to go north, if not to rally your ships then to sail on to the Salt Spear and join my uncle Victorian at Moat Cailin. I wish to bring him home, Asher declared. Euron shrugged and frowned. Oh, dear sweet niece. Did I not mention? No. That won't be possible. You see, the Flints and the Reeds have seized the longships in the Fever River and are holding them for the Starks. As for Victorian, I'm afraid he's very much dead, Euron explained with a feigned look of sympathy. Asher's heart sunk into her stomach. You're lying, she protested, shaking her head. He died well. That should give you some comfort. He was facing starvation and disease and instead chose to go out like a warrior. Charged out of Moat Cailin after slaughtering some mutineers. The Northmen unleashed volley after volley of arrows on him and his men, and they kept fucking going. Vic was always a dumb brute, but I have to say, it was fucking glorious to behold. He was the last one to fall, as a matter of fact, one final arrow by none other than our dear Theon to finish him off. Asher gritted her teeth, shocked and angry but not wishing to give Euron the satisfaction of a response. He even looted Victorian. Keeping in with the iron price and all that. Took his axe, his cloak, his armor, Euron explained. Asher took a shaky breath of rage. You knew. You knew all this was happening. You didn't send Victorian help. You didn't use your fucking witchcraft to help him, she snapped. Euron stepped forward and looked down at Asher. I watched and listened. I saw things. I see things now. I have eyes and ears everywhere. Not just my birds. I see all kinds of things in all different ways. I see Hoster Tully on a flaming boat sinking into the water. I see Renly Baratheon and his men fighting Stannis loyalists in the Kingswood. I see fire-worshipping zealots from Essos arriving on motley boats to pledge their undying allegiance to the grumpy twat Stannis. I see the one-handed Jaime Lannister face down fucking his sister's brains out, and that Cersei is a proper Mona, let me tell you, Euron declared with a smile. I also saw you. I saw you in your pretty chainmail dress, as smug as ever, giving our dear Theon instructions on how to escape to the north. Which would mean, all the things that Theon did, defeating your war bands, retaking the castles, capturing Aerion, killing Victorian. All that would be your fault, wouldn't it? Euron asked. Asha's heart was thumping in her chest. It's impossible, she thought. It's impossible for him to know all this. How do you know that? She asked timidly. Euron snickered and returned to his seat on the tavern bench, leaning back against the table and spreading his arms out. When I was a boy, I dreamt that I could fly, he announced. When I woke, I couldn't, or so the Maester said. But what if he lied? Euron turned to face Asha, his bruised blue lips curled in a half-smile. Perhaps we can fly. All of us. How will we ever know unless we leap from some tall tower? No man ever truly knows what he can do unless he dares to leap. Asha was lost and confused, not sure what her uncle was babbling about. When I was enjoying my exile in Essos, I met a man, someone from our country. An exile, banished from Westeros by the patriarch of his house because he was too loyal. He knew how to fly and then he taught me, Euron explained. We Ironborn are descendants of the first men, though we like to forget it. Our ancestors learned how to fly through the birds and prowl through beasts. But we forgot how. He reminded me. Then he taught me to see with 1,000 eyes and one. We traveled together, learned much together, preparing for our triumphant return to our homeland. I wanted him to give me power. He wanted me as a weapon in the coming war he wished to wage to restore his exiled house. But then we looked at each other with our hidden eyes and we saw no loyalty, only two men using one another as a means to an end. Naturally, we couldn't trust each other and we couldn't let each other live, so we fought. We both left our marks on one another before parting ways. Both of us were mortally wounded, but I survived at least. Though, afterwards I never found his body. Perhaps he's dead, perhaps not. But when I parted from him I took his sword for myself, Euron explained, drawing his blade and brandishing it. A slender longsword of Valyrian steel, elegant and darkly beautiful. I call her the unloved wife in homage to her most famous wielder. A more fitting name than the original, Euron explained with a cackle, but Asha did not understand or care about the joke. Since then my education has only expanded. I've been all over the world. Ashai, Gagossos, Qohor, Qarth, Braavos, Lies, and so many other places. I've learned from sorcerers, stormsingers, shape-changers, blood mages, alchemists, shadowbinders, dreamers, fire mages, aeromancers, warlocks and wizards. I sailed to Valyria, took what I wanted and left. You ask me how I saw you collaborate with Theon in his escape as though it were impossible. But to me, that trick was mere child's play, Euron boasted with a wicked smile. Asha felt cold and fearful. Are you going to tell my father? She asked. Euron shook his head and tsked. There's no need for that. So long as you behave. You will accompany me to Cricket Hall where we will rally our fleet. Once assembled, we will sail down and take the Shield Islands, then Bunderlin, then Blackcrown, then Three Towers and finally Old Town. Asha huffed through her nose. When we attack Old Town, they'll be prepared for us. Highgarden will rally its levies and overwhelm us. As soon as we attack the Shield Islands, the entire Reach will rally against us, she protested. Not if they are left unaware, Euron explained, only further vexing Asha. For example, did you know that Tywin Lannister has no clue that his homeland is currently being marauded by us? As far as he's concerned, all fighting in the wastelands ended when the young wolf scurried back east to make a smoked salmon out of his grandfather, Euron explained. It's the strangest thing. Every raven his bannermen have sent to him have all either died or come directly to me. The birds just find me and bring me the letters, or some other birds claw them out of the sky. I don't know what possesses them. Well, that's a lie, I know exactly what possesses them, he declared smugly. The point I am trying to make is this. I can guarantee you that every castle, island or holdfast we attack in the Reach will never get a message to Highgarden or any other castle nearby. Every raven will come to me and every rider will be thrown from his horse. But out of the goodness of my heart, I will send my winged eyes to Highgarden, carrying the messages from Mace's lords asking for aid. But I will not do it until we reach the Red Wine Strait, so that by the time Mace marches his armies out to rescue his vassals around the Shield Islands, we'll already be on our way to Old Town. Completely unexpected, Euron explained. Even if we get to Old Town undetected, it's a strong city with many fortifications. It will not fall easily, Asher declared. Unless you know where its weaknesses are, Euron countered. Oh, let me guess, you have eyes there too. Asher declared, looking again to the ravens on the rafters. I do. But I actually went and implanted some weaknesses myself when I visited Old Town a short while ago. I stopped by shortly before returning home at Balon's request. You went to Old Town? The notorious exiled Greyjoy who set Lannisport on fire. How did they not rip you apart when you made port? Asher asked. Well, they didn't see me. Or rather, they did see me but thought they were seeing a humble old man or a merchant sailor or whatever face I was wearing at the time, Euron explained. Wearing faces? Who taught you that? Asher asked, folding her arms. No one from Braavos. After no one had been hired to kill me, I caught no one and pulled all his secrets out of him. He was a brilliant liar, almost tricked me into freeing him several times. But eventually, no one broke and told me all his little secrets, Euron declared, sipping from his wine. Everything Euron said was cryptic babble and obscure riddles, and Asher was sick of it. So what is this weakness you have put in Old Town? Asher asked. In time, sweet niece, in time. For now, relax, drink, find one of our captured thralls that you take a fancy to and fuck him, or her if that's what you like. Everything is going according to plan, Euron explained. Whose plan? The Ironborn's or Euron's? Now off you go, you're dismissed, Euron declared, waving his hand to show Asher off. Dismissed? I am the princess of the Iron Islands. Asher declared. Euron seemed unfazed by Asher's outburst. And does the king of the Iron Islands need to know why his disgraced son was able to escape, ruin his invasion of the north, capture one brother and kill the other? Asher sunk back and lowered her head. Good girl. Now off you go, Euron reiterated. Asher scrunched up her face and stormed out of the tavern. She was furious at her father for letting Euron back into the fold, she was furious at Theon for not joining them when he had the chance and for killing Victorian, she was furious at Victorian for not retreating, and most of all she was furious at Euron for just being fucking Euron. As Asher stomped through the pillaged town, she heard a great rustling like the beating of wings followed by many squawks, and when she turned around, she saw an unkindness of ravens swarm out of the tavern through the windows and out in the air, spreading through the sky and flying off in all directions. More eyes Euron was sending out into the world to spy for him. When Asher turned forward, she saw perched on a thatched roof of a house, a raven looking at her. Asher wondered if it was just a random raven coming to peck at the corpses of those slain in the raid, or if it was her uncle looking at her through the black bird's eyes. She could not tell, all she could do was fear. Fear the birds, fear the unknown, and fear Euron, and perhaps that is what he wanted. Chapter 52, The Little Bird. Chapter text. Sansa fluttered her wings as she circled the Red Keep, the great red stone castle being infinitely bigger and more complex when she saw it through the eyes of the little white dove. Sansa struggled to fly the dove through the air, unable to trust the instincts of the little bird and forget she was human. She had only entered the mind of the bird a few times thus far, after spending months bonding with it, feeding it and forming the skin changer bond. Sansa's bond with Lady had been so natural and effortless, but her link with the little dove was not as strong or as easy to form or maintain. The little dove had perched itself on Sansa's window now and again, and she would watch it sit there for a while. A simple little white bird, so innocent and gentle, a creature that saw the world so simply and did not understand the despair and tragedy that the Seven Kingdoms were in. The bird didn't even know what the Seven Kingdoms were. The sweet purity Sansa felt as she watched it coo and pivot its head and walk up and down the stone sill of her window made her remember more peaceful times before the war and before she came to King's Landing. After all, the dove was the bird of peace. When the dove flew away, she would feel an uncomfortable pit of envy well up in her stomach. Not only was she jealous of how carefree and happy the little dove's life was, but she also coveted the little bird's liberty. The dove came and went at its own leisure, never restrained, never caged. It flew in and flew away as it saw fit. What Sangza would give for the dove's wings, to be able to soar over the city of King's Landing and fly far away, to the riverlands where her mother and brother were, or better yet home to Winterfell, the very place she once foolishly wished to escape when she was a dumb child who dreamt of romanticism of the southern kingdoms. One day, when Sangza was watching the little bird fly away, wishing it was her, it struck the young Stark girl, that perhaps it could be. Not in body, not truly, but Sangza understood that she could fly through the bird using the skin changer bond. From then on, when the dove visited her sill, Sangza began concentrating and trying to project a bond onto the dove's mind as the children of the forest and the priests of the Wolfswood had taught Sangza and her siblings to do with their direwolves. It took much longer with the dove than it ever had with Lady, with whom the link was almost instant. For weeks, Sangza's efforts never really seemed to connect with the bird's mind directly, but made the small creature feel calm and safe around Sangza and allowed her to approach and pet the dove, fostering familiarity between the two, which in turn helped their bond strengthen. When Sangza was finally able to enter the mind of the little dove and see through its eyes, Jane Poole kept watch while Sangza was in the trance, shaking her back to her waking mind if anyone came to their chamber. For a while, Sangza just flew around the Red Keep, getting familiar with the different areas of the castle from a bird's eye view and seeing how long she could maintain her trance. It had been a long time since Lady had died, so Sangza was very out of practice as a skin changer, and even when Lady was alive, Sangza rarely entered a trance to take over Lady. There was something about being a direwolf and feeling as a wolf felt when she was in Lady's mind that Sangza thought was ladylike, which was all Sangza was concerned with back then. Even though Sangza's walk bond with Lady was not as regularly exercised as her siblings were with their direwolves, it was just as strong, and Sangza knew she wanted to bond with Lady the first time she set eyes on the little pup when they brought the litter of direwolves back to Winterfell. The skin changer bond was the first part of northern culture that Sangza actually became truly enthusiastic and excited about. Ever since she was a very small child, Sangza had always been her mother's daughter. She spoke with a proper southern high-born accent, she knew how to embroider and dance like a southern lady. She fantasized about the kingdoms in the south and getting to wear fancy silk dresses and more lavish jewelry than what was traditionally found in the north. She dreamt of long summers and bright flowery gardens rather than the cold and damp lands of the north. She dreamt of knights and princes, not knowing the kinds of brutes Joffrey and his Kingsguard turned out to be. There were still some things she loved about home: the harvest festivals, playing in the snow, and all the small things that made Winterfell feel like home. She worshipped both in the September with her mother and in the Godswood with her father, believing in both the old and the new gods. She felt that both Isildur and God the Father watched over her and loved her equally, and she took pride in being a descendant of Kala. She kept little wooden carvings of Alessa, Freynia as well as the mother and the maiden on her nightstand and regarded them as her four patrons. Sangza also knew the old tongue, learning it as was expected of her as a northerner, but only spoke it when she had to after she heard Septa Mordane call it northern gibberish once. One northern tradition that Sangza hated and forsook altogether was the tradition of axe and sword. It was common custom for both sons and daughters of the north to have at least a basic training in the use of arms, though sons tended to go further in their training than most daughters, but many women in the north were proud to call themselves spearwives. When Sangza was maybe 6, Sir Roderick bundled her up in heavily padded training armor and a leather helm that was too big for her and then gave her a long wooden sword. Her father, unarmored, stood across from her also armed with a wooden sword. Sangza stood there pouting and whimpering, and her father came close and knelt before her. He said he was going to teach her how to protect herself and that he was not going to hurt her. Sangza meekly nodded and her father returned to his position. He then told Sangza to hold her sword out and told her that he would strike it so that Sangza could get used to the feeling of a strike. Sangza then held her wooden sword out with both hands, her arms shaking, and braced for the strike. Her father then swung his wooden sword and stuck the upper blade of Sangza's like the swing of Mikken's hammer on a piece of metal, but with less than half the force. When Sangza felt the jolt of her father's strike run through the wooden sword into her arms, she let the sword drop to the ground and began bawling her eyes out. Sangza was not hurt and barely even felt the jolt from her father's strike, but she did not want to use a sword and threw a tantrum at her first opportunity to escape being trained. Her father dropped to his knees, kissed her brow, hugged her and said he was sorry. Before long, Sangza's mother scooped her up, told her father that swordplay clearly wasn't for Sangza and took her inside. That was the last time Sangza ever held a sword or any weapon. Even Beth Castle and Jane Poole got further in their training than she did, and they were no warriors, but at least they could defend themselves. When it was Arya's turn to train, she was enthusiastic about it, but their mother saw Sangza's failed experience as reason enough for her not to be trained, which only made Arya mad at Sangza. Arya did train of course, but their mother and Septa Mordane kept conspiring to schedule her lessons in embroidery, dancing and other ladylike duties to overlap with the time she set aside for training. After a few weeks of getting a handle on controlling the mind of the dove, Sangza began to use it. She knew she could not use a dove to somehow get Jane and Sangza to Riverrun or Winterfell, but at the very least Sangza could use it to stay informed. As Sangza circled the Red Keep through the dove's eyes, she soared downward towards the window of the small council chamber. In the weeks past, on especially hot days, Sangza would be able to fly the dove into the small council chamber and watch the council undetected from atop the head of one of the Valyrian Sphinx statues. But recently, Sangza had found a small hole in the walls of the Red Keep above the window that led into a rat tunnel, and inside the rat tunnel Sangza found a beam of light shining through from another hole in the corner of the roof of the small council chamber, big enough for Sangza to watch and hear the council without her dove being spotted. The dove waddled through the rat tunnel to the hole in the ceiling, looking down at the council chamber. The doors of the chamber were flanked by a pair of tall Valyrian Sphinx statues, and a long table filled the middle of the room. Seated at the end of the table was Joffrey, who was dressed in a red velvet doublet detailed with gold vinery patterns. By the king's side on his right was Lord Tywine, the hand of the king, and across from him was the Dowager Queen and Regent, Cersei. Sitting next to Tywine on the right was Lord Tyrion, who served as a special advisor to the council, and across from him at Cersei's side was the Master of Laws, Sir Kevan Lannister, brother to Lord Tywine. The next row down was the elderly Lord Giles Rosby, the Master of Coin, and Lord Varys, the Master of Whisperers. The final two seats were occupied by Sir Adam Marbrand, the Lord Commander of the City Watch, and Grand Maester Pycelle, who had been restored to his station by Lord Tywine. The seat of the Master of Ships remained vacant and redundant since most of the fleet was destroyed during the Battle of the Three Stags and Stannis still blockaded the Blackwater. The last individual in the council chamber was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Meryn Trant, who stood behind the king on his right, vigilantly guarding him. The council was already in session, with Sir Adam Marbrand giving some kind of report. And a further 230 of the prisoners captured from Stannis's host have renounced him and sworn obeisance to King Joffrey, bringing the overarching number to 2,527, Sir Adam explained. Good. We will need them to garrison the city when our plans come to fruition, Tywine declared. On that matter, what news of the 4 rebel kings? Has there been any change since our last meeting? It was clear to Sangza from the few council meetings she had seen that Lord Tywine was now the true king, while Joffrey sat silently and listened, no more than a figurehead. Lord Varys was the first to speak up. Renly still fights in the Stormlands. My little birds say that his streak of victories against his brother's loyalists remains unimpeded, having liberated 2 of his loyal castles from siege and reclaiming 3 more from his brother's control. Renly's sudden turning of the tides could sway those who pledged to Stannis back to Renly's side. As for the elder of Robert's brothers, I cannot say anything other than he watches and waits on Dragonstone, Varys explained. And the young wolf? Tywine asked. He still remains at Riverrun after his grand's funeral. From what my little birds can gather, his entire southern host is marshalled between Riverrun and Harrenhal under Lord Roose Bolton. We also have intelligence that Balon Greyjoy's invasion into the north has been completely routed and Moat Cailin has been restored to Robb Stark's control. What the Greyjoy forces are doing now, I cannot say, Varys declared. Sangza was relieved when she first heard that the Greyjoys had been driven from the north, but also a bit sad when she heard that her grandson had passed, a man she had never gotten to know but had heard so many wonderful things about from her mother. Well, then I suggest your birds find intelligence on what Greyjoy is doing now, Varys. I want to know how many ships the Wet King has remaining to him and where they are, Tywine declared sternly. Why a sudden interest in the Greyjoys, father? I doubt they will pose much threat to us on the other side of the country, Tyrion declared. On the other side of the country from us, but only a stone's throw away from Lannisport where our fleet is, and I would not have those ships harassed by Greyjoy's fleet. Many on the council looked at one another with vexed expressions. You mean to launch a naval assault? Against whom? Kevan asked. Sigurd is my target, Tywine declared. The council only got more confused, as was Sansa, who did not understand the strategic value of the home of House Mallister. To give our forces a foothold to reach the twins and cut off Robb Stark from the crossing, Sir Adam suggested. The twins cannot be taken so easily, and we do not have the resources to waste trying such an action. Furthermore, attempting to take the twins would put us between Moat Cailin, the Bloody Gate, Riverrun and Harrenhal. Our forces would be enveloped and crushed within a fortnight. No, I would have Sigurd taken so that we might steal back the highborn hostages Robb Stark has taken from us during this war. With Harrenhal taken by Roose Bolton, all our hostages against Stark were liberated, and now I wish to see the scales balanced, Tywine declared. The council seemed vexed and confused, some muttering to one another. My little birds have whispered nothing to me of Sigurd, my lord Hand. Through what source have you been led to believe that is where our hostages are being held? The spider asked. Tywine glowered at the eunuch from across the table. Do not concern yourself with the nature of my source of information, only that I regard it to be reliable. I have had regular and continuous insights into Robb Stark's movements and actions for some time now, and that is all I will say on that. Robb has a spy in his court, Sansa thought. This was terrible. Someone was feeding information about Robb to Tywine under his very nose, and Sansa was helpless to stop it. Even if Sansa wrote a letter and tied it to the Dove's Foot, she knew not the way to find Riverrun. She knew it was west, but where in the west? Regardless, her bond with the Dove was not as strong a bond yet. The further and further it got from her, the harder it was for her to maintain control over it. All Sansa could do was listen and wait. I also have it on good authority that Robb Stark's continued stay at Riverrun will not last much longer. Another matter your little birds failed to uncover, Tywine declared, glaring once again at Varys. Soon, the young wolf will marshal his assembled forces at Riverrun and march on to Harrenhal, where he will join with Roose Bolton. From there, with the vast majority of his forces united in a single host, Stark will march down the King's Road and besiege us here once again. With Stannis and Renly occupied in the Stormlands and the city's defences thinned from the Battle of the Three Stags, the Boy King wishes to end us with one final blow. The councillors all looked at one another again, some puzzled and others uncomfortable. Whoever this spy in Robb's court was, they clearly had close eyes on his war councils, which made Sansa feel unsettled. So, does this mean that you intend for us all to go through with this plan of yours? Sending our armies out west and the whole farcical display that goes along with it? Tyrion asked. Yes, I do. It is the only path forward, Tywine declared. It is a very bold course of action, brother. There are many ways it can go wrong. Is it not too risky? Sir Kevan asked meekly. The risk of our doom should this plan fail pales in comparison to the unwavering certainty of doom that is spelled for us should we wait here for the Stark boy to come down upon us, Tywine retorted. Next the old Grand Maester cleared his throat and spoke up. But my lord, does this course of action not endanger the reputation and credence of King Joffrey's cause? The symbolism of abandoning. Symbolism? Tywine snapped. We are speaking of survival and you wave symbolism in my face. We will not consign ourselves to die at the hands of those traitors to save face in the vanity of history books and the gossiping of commoners, Tywine declared, making Pycelle recoil in fear. Sansa for the life of her could not decipher what plan they were speaking of. Now, then. Where are we with the tunnels and the ferries? Tywine asked. Just as Tyrion began giving a report, Sansa held her shoulder, being shaken vigorously as a voice called her name. The sight of the small council chamber through the Dove's eyes faded away like a daydream, and Sansa was once again in her room in Maegor's Holdfast, being shaken back to her waking mind by Jane. Sansa, Jane said again, desperately trying to wake her. What is it? Sansa asked, taking Jane's arms. Someone's coming, Jane said, looking to the door. When Sansa entered the mind of the Dove, Jane would keep watch and make sure to wake her if anyone ever encroached on them. The last thing the two girls needed was for someone to see Sansa doing her northern witchcraft, as they called it. Sansa stood up and faced the door. She could not think of who would be coming to her and Jane's chambers. Just a moment ago she saw Lord Tywine, Joffrey, Cersei, Meryn Trant and Tyrion all at the small council, so it couldn't possibly be any of them. A knock came at the door. "Enter," Sansa said confidently. The door opened and escorted by Lannister soldiers, a group of young women entered, led by the claimant Queen Margaery Tyrell. "Good morrow to you, Lady Sansa," the Tyrell Queen greeted as she entered the chamber. "Good morrow, my your grace," Sansa replied kindly. Sansa first met Margaery and her ladies-in-waiting on the night of the Battle of the Three Kings. The group of young women had been captured at Renly's rear siege camp and were taken to Sansa and Jaime's quarters by Lord Tywin's orders. A group of rough and ugly guards covered in scars and smelling of wine dragged the girls to the chamber, some pulled through the halls by their arms or hair and some carried over the shoulders of the men. The girls were all bound and gagged at the time, whimpering, squealing and crying as they were carried and dragged to Sansa and Jaime's chamber and thrown at the stone floor while Sansa and Jaime huddled together in the corner in fear. One of the guards called the girls new playmates for Sansa and Jaime before spitting on one of the girls and leaving such barbarous and uncivilized behavior. Margaery was the last one brought into the chamber with a laughing ugly soldier carrying her in over his shoulder. After mockingly calling Sansa's room the Queen's new chambers, he slapped Margaery on the ass while his friends laughed and then dumped Margaery on the ground like a heavy sack of grain. After the soldiers left the chamber laughing and singing, Jaime quickly went over and closed the door behind them. For a moment, Sansa and Jaime were unsure of what to do, having not been told anything about the girls by the half-drunk battle-excited soldiers. After an awkward indecisive moment of watching the young women squirm around on the floor and whimper with tears, Sansa and Jaime tended to the girls, undoing their bindings and taking off their gags. They treated their bruises from the abusive soldiers who apprehended them and put blankets over their shoulders, comforting them after all the horrors the girls saw during their capture and the battle. Margaery spoke for her ladies, thanking Sansa and Jaime for their kindness as she cradled Eleanor and Alla Tyrell under her arms, the two girls crying. Two of Margaery's company did not survive the capture. When Medithe Crane, Janna Fossoe and Megha Tyrell tried to run out of the pavilion, Medithe and Megha were caught, but Janna kept running, pursued by Tywin's men but was trampled to death by a mounted knight. Margaery's Septa, Nesterica, tried to shield the girls from the Lannisters with a dinner knife, but as a low-born Septa, the soldiers saw no reason to take her hostage and slaughtered her there and then. Another Septa who died protecting the young ladies she served from Lannister soldiers, just like Sansa and Jaime's own Septa Mordane. In the days that followed, Margaery and her entourage were moved to their own chambers in Maegor's, but in the many weeks since the battle, Margaery and her retinue frequently visited with Sansa and Jaime and vice versa, hostages sticking together and comforting each other with pleasant company. "My ladies and I were wondering if you would like to join us for tea in the Godswood. It's a fine day and it would do well to get some fresh air instead of wasting away here in Maegor's," said Margaery. "We would be delighted," Sansa said courteously with a smile growing on her face. Much like Sansa and Jaime, Margaery and her ladies were given almost free rein of the Red Keep, but always with Lannister soldiers dogging their every move and following them from a short distance. Only behind closed doors with single exits did they ever get any privacy with their Lannister gaolers standing guard outside. The Godswood was a place where they could be unobserved so long as all the entrances were covered by their Lannister captors, which made it an ideal outdoor retreat for them, where they could escape the prying eyes of those who controlled them and hide in the illusion that they were actually free. Sansa and Jaime joined Margaery and her ladies and walked through the halls, both Margaery and Sansa's Lannister guards joining together, creating a small contingent of Lannister soldiers trailing behind the girls from a short distance. Margaery took Sansa's arm and held her hand, leading her to the front of the entourage as they moved through the halls. Margaery had been kind, caring and constant for Sansa in the weeks since she came to the Red Keep, not paying any heed to the fact that her husband and Sansa's brothers were regarded as enemies, as both rivaled one another for the crowns of the North, the Riverlands and the Vale, yet at least no battles had been fought between the two as of yet. In their early conversations in the days following the Battle of the Three Stags, Margaery was kind enough to tell Sansa of when her mother Catelyn came to their war camp at Bitterbridge, with Margaery detailing how prestigious, wise and respectful she was when she addressed Renly and his bannermen. Sansa coveted every detail Margaery could recall about her mother, from what she was wearing to every word she said, and Margaery did her best to accommodate Sansa's wishes. Eventually, the retinue of girls and their following guards made their way out of Maegor's Holdfast, through the castle past glaring nobles and out to the square-acre courtyard of forest overlooking the Blackwater Rush tucked within thick walls. Their Lannister captors fanned out and covered all the entrances into the Godswood to keep the girls from escaping as they entered. The Godswood of the Red Keep seemed a pale imitation of the ones in the north Sansa had seen, but that was to be expected given how faint the memory of the old gods was in the south. Since the Andal invasion, or the coming of the Andals as they called it in the south, the faith of the Seven ruled in the south and many of the sacred wirewood trees were cut down. There was a sense of familiarity that Sansa felt as she walked amongst the elm, alder, and black cottonwood trees all clustered together, but it still wasn't the same as the godswood back home. Deep in the heart of the courtyard forest was the open glade between the trees where the heart tree sat upon a shallow hill. Rather than a wirewood tree of smooth-bone white bark and red five-pointed leaves, it was instead a great brown oak tree with common green leaves and not so much as a carved face for the gods to watch her through. Sansa still prayed at the oak tree now and again, for even without a true heart tree to watch her through, Sansa could still feel the old gods watching her with 1,000 unseen eyes. What Sansa did not expect was to see a long table with a white cloth draped over it set with enough seats for all the young girls set in the middle of the glade on level ground beneath the heart tree, and set on the table was a tea set as well as fruit, pie and sweets set out for them. Sansa had no doubt that it was Margaery's doing. She was an incredibly sharp and charming woman and had easily made herself well liked by the stewards, servants and even some of the guards who tended to her and her ladies in Maegor's Holdfast. Despite being a prisoner, she eloquently presented herself as a sort of honored guest and won the hearts of many in the castle, speaking sweetly and showing a tender smile that made all who saw her adore her. The girls all gathered around the table and sat down, drinking tea and eating snacks, talking and laughing as though they were not all hostages at the mercy of Joffrey and the Queen. A nice fantasy, a tranquil escape from the war and all the madness that had consumed the world since the dead King Robert came to Winterfell. Eventually, the conversation over tea turned to the war, for the privacy of the godswood was one of the few places they could speak frankly about such things. Margaery and her girls were mainly focused on Renly's campaign in the south, fighting against Stannis's loyalists and reclaiming castles from his side. "Has there been any word of Aelin?" Eleanor asked. The Tyrell girl asked the same question every time they came together and spoke of Renly's host, but Margaery's reply was always the same. "Sorry, we've heard nothing of him yet." Aelin Ambrose was a squire whom Eleanor was betrothed to and she was desperately worried about him. Some of the younger Reach girls seemed to have the hope that upon Renly securing the Stormlands from Stannis, he would return to King's Landing and free them, something Margaery and the older girls did not dissuade them from thinking, but Margaery would look across at Sansa and both would share a knowing gaze that if Renly even attempted to return to King's Landing now, Joffrey would have their heads mounted on pikes. When the conversation on the Stormlands went dry, the girls turned their attention to Sansa and Jane and talked about the northern campaign. The girls were fascinated with the north and asked many questions, about giants, children of the forest and skin changers, with Sansa and Jane doing their best to accommodate their curiosities. "Earlier, I heard a Westerlands knight talk about how a giant they fought at the Green Fork picked up a horse and flailed it about like a morning star. Are they truly that big?" Maegor Tyrell asked. Sansa shrugged. "It depends on the giant. Some can grow as big as 10 feet tall while others as big as 14 feet or even bigger. As I have said before, I am no expert. I have not seen a giant since I was but a little girl when Mag the Mighty and representatives of his clan came to visit my father at Winterfell," she explained. "And do they really talk? Talk as people talk?" Merry Crane asked. "They do, but they speak the old tongue and very few learn to speak the common tongue," Jane explained. "But how? Who trains them to talk?" Alla Tyrell asked. Alla Leonette Fossoe hissed. "Giants are not animals, no one trains them to talk. Apologize to Lady Sansa." "No, it's fine," Sansa said, dismissing the matter. Truthfully, Sansa did find it rather rude. The giants were a proud and ancient race and did not deserve to be compared to animals, but the girl didn't know any better, so Sansa let the issue go. "What about skin changers?" Maegor asked, switching the topic rather bluntly. "Is it true what they say around the castle? That you once were one? That you could turn into a wolf and tried to eat King Joffrey and so the Seven cursed you to remain human?" Maegor asked. "Maegor?" Margaery snapped. "Forgive her rudeness, my lady. She meant no offense," Alicent Bulwer begged. Jane leaned over to Sansa and spoke in the old tongue. "These Andals will believe anything. Let us not be rude to them, Jane. We will speak in words they can understand," Sansa declared. "That is actually wrong on a few accounts," Lady Maegor. Sansa began to explain, speaking curiously. First of all, skin changing does not make us turn into animals, at least not in the way you described. We find animals and form bonds with them, then with time we can enter their minds, influence them, control them, even be them for a time, Sangza began to explain. The girls were fascinated by Sangza's words. And you were a skin changer? Eleanor asked. Sangza faintly smiled. I was once a warg, yes. My bond was with a direwolf, her name was Lady Sangza explained solemnly as Jane gently placed her hand over Sangza's. The direwolf is the symbol of your house, yes? Margari asked. Sangza nodded. It is. For thousands of years, we Starks have been taking the direwolves of the Wolfswood as our warg mates. When Starks go into the Wolfswood, sometimes a baby direwolf pup will be found abandoned, left for the Starks to take care of. We call it the gift of Kaldur, Sangza explained. The Reach girls were completely enraptured with Sangza's words. When my father was a young boy, he, my uncles and my aunt all found direwolf pups. My uncle Brandon had Longfang, who was killed by the Mad King's guards and his body hacked into small pieces and mounted on pikes over Maegor's Holdfast. My father's direwolf Frost died fighting by his side at the Trident in Robert's Rebellion. My uncle Benjen's direwolf Shadow was one I remembered from my youth, night black fur like my brother Rooken's and red eyes like my half-brother John's. When I was 6 I think, Shadow got sick, he stopped eating, he was getting weaker, my uncle stayed with him all through his illness, but he didn't make it, Sangza explained. That is so sad, Alison Bulwer said, resting her hand upon her heart. Sangza nodded in solemn agreement. What about your Aunt Lyanna's direwolf? Margari asked. Silver. Well, that's interesting. When my Aunt Lyanna was kidnapped by Roriga, Silver went missing and some presumed she was dead, having been killed by Roriga when he abducted my aunt, but my father and uncle claimed to have seen her through the trees in the Wolfswood now and again over the years. It was not until a few years ago when my father, uncle and my brothers were riding through the Wolfswood they found Silver by a stream, dead. She had been impaled by a stag antler and sucking at her nipples they found 6 direwolf pups which my siblings and I took as our warg mates. And where is your wolf now? Mega asked. Sangza frowned and sighed. On our way here from Winterfell, we stopped at the Ruby Ford. My sister Arya was playing wooden swords with a young butcher's boy and I came along with Joffrey, who was slightly drunk at the time. Joffrey started flourishing his sword about and threatening the boy, and my sister hit Joffrey with a stick. Joffrey got mad and attacked my sister. Her direwolf sensed Arya was in danger and attacked Joffrey. Arya ran away and sent her wolf into the forest to hide, and Cersei insisted that Robert have Lady killed in place of Arya's wolf for biting Joffrey's arm, Sangza explained. Gods be good, Leonette uttered. I am so sorry, Margari added. Sangza nodded and smiled in appreciation. So it was your sister who tried to use her wolf to eat Joffrey? Mega asked. Sangza shook her head and huffed. No. My sister wasn't in control of her direwolf at the time. Nymeria was just trying to protect Arya of her own accord. No one tried to eat anyone, and I certainly wasn't cursed by the gods. To use the skin changer bond to eat the flesh of a human is one of our 3 most accursed taboos in regards to the bond, Sangza explained. When Margari noticed how tense the conversation had gotten, she shifted it once again. The morning tea party in the Godswood lasted perhaps an hour and a half before Padric Payne arrived, interrupting their happy little party. The nervous young man nodded his head respectfully before speaking. Lady Sangza, he said, making her feel like she had just been called for execution. Lord Tyrion requests your presence in his solar, my lady, the Payne squire explained. Sangza huffed, gave Jane a reassuring look, stood up, thanked Margari and the girls for sharing the day with her, and followed Padric out of the Godswood. 2 of the Lannister guards outside the Godswood broke off from the rest and followed behind Sangza from a short distance. Young Padric led Sangza through the castle back towards Maegor's Holdfast, stopping and turning around after getting lost twice, but eventually, Sangza was brought through the halls to Tyrion's solar. Padric opened the door and led Sangza into the solar, where Lord Tyrion was sitting behind his desk, and standing over his shoulder was his brother, Sir Jaime. A cold shiver went down Sangza's back as her heart quickened, a pit of anger and detest grew in her stomach as she looked to the Kingslayer. Sangza had heard the stories, she knew that he was the man who pushed Bran from the tower, and she also knew he was the one who was responsible for Jory's death and her father's leg being broken. Lady Sansa for you, Lord Tyrion Podrick introduced. Thank you, leave us Pod Tyrion replied. Podrick nodded, left the room and closed it behind Sansa. Lady Sansa, good day to you. You remember my brother, Sir Jaime, surely Tyrion greeted from across the room. I recall him, yes. As do I recall his many attacks on my family, Sansa declared sternly. She would not be meek and cordial to the man who pushed her baby brother from a tower window and almost killed him. Sir Jaime's confident smile faded away and Lord Tyrion also became quite awkward. The dwarf cleared his throat. Well. Perhaps you will also recall that my brother was captured at the Whispering Wood close to the start of the war and was later released by your own mother, Lady Catelyn Tyrion explained. Sansa did not understand the relevance to the conversation. Sir Jaime promised to return Sansa to her mother. Sir Jaime lied, she knew not why that was relevant now. Yes, I know, Sansa said, still unsure why she had been summoned. Well. As you know, a Lannister always pays his debts, but sometimes other Lannisters have to be misled about those debts, he began as the dwarf motioned past Sansa's shoulder. Sansa turned around and saw a face she did not expect, hiding in the corner of the room. A large red-faced man dressed in a court fool's garment. Sir Dontos she greeted with surprise. The knight turned fool beamed with happiness. It is good to know I have not faded from the mind of the woman who saved my life, he greeted as he approached. Sir Dontos here came to my brother and I with a proposition, offering to help us get yourself and the pool girl back to your mother. As it turns out, Sir Dontos works for our mutual acquaintance, Lord Baelish Tyrion explained. Lord Baelish? Sansa thought. When last she saw him, he came to her after her father's execution and warned Sansa to guard herself and trust no one, promising to do everything he could to get the two girls back to the north. A few weeks later he was reported through castle gossip to have fled the Red Keep, and later Sansa found out from Lord Tyrion that he had found Arya and smuggled her out of the city. Suddenly, a glimmer of hope emerged in Sansa's heart. Sir Dontos came close, took off his bell-sewn hat and held it to his breast and took Sansa's hand with the other one. You saved my life once, now I would like to do the same, Dontos explained. Sansa then turned to Lord Tyrion, who had always been kind and protective of her. My brother and I feel a moral obligation to see you returned home, my lady. You have been Joffrey's abused plaything for too long. Do you wish to go home? Tyrion asked. In the past, Sansa would have fearfully said that she was loyal to Joffrey and that her mother, brother and father were all traitors for fear that saying anything else would get her killed, but now Sansa dared to say the word, yes. Tyrion smiled and gestured to the seat across from his desk. Come, we have much to talk about. Chapter 53, Becoming More. Chapter text. The courtyard rang to the Song of Swords. Beneath the fluttering banners of leaping silver trouts over ripples of red and blue hanging from the walls of Riverrun, the battle guard of King Robb was assembled for training. Eddard Karstark stabbed his sword at Jon, but he quickly parried the blade away and brought his tawny sword around for a swing, striking Karstark on the back, sending him to the ground. Jon flourished his blade and corrected his stance as he glared down at his opponent, waiting to see if he would continue or surrender. Yield, Eddard grunted as he tried to push himself up from the ground. As the rest of the battle guard applauded Jon, he reached down and offered Eddard a helping hand to his feet, which his Karstark comrade happily accepted. In the days since Lord Hoster's funeral, the battle guard had taken a few hours out of every day to spend together, either riding, hunting or sparring. When Robb's host returned from the Westerlands, it marked the first time since his mother set out for the Reach that his battle guard was at full strength. Sir Wendell Marndaly, Robin Flint and Sir Winfrey had all been selected by Robb to accompany his mother to parley with King Renly, as well as Lucas Blackwood and Sir Waymar Royce, who they had never had the chance to fight alongside since they did not join the battle guard until after Riverrun was retaken. Torred and Dormund weren't named to the battle guard until after Theon, Patrek and the contingent sent with Lady Catelyn had already departed. Now they were all united for the first time, with new additions to their little band. Reynold had joined them in Westerlands as Robb's banner-bearer and his little brother Rolam as Robb's second squire. Sygorn of Thun, son of Manger Styr of Thun, was appointed to the battle guard upon Robb's return, having arrived with the second northern host under Mance. Lastly, Theon and Patrek convinced Robb to bring Ramsay Snow, the bastard of the Dreadfort, into their fold. Jon trusted Theon, but not his judgment in regard to Ramsay. There was something foul in his smile, a dark and menacing nature to him that John did not feel comfortable about, but the decision was out of John's hands. As John pitted the tip of his blade into the dirt soil of the courtyard, he looked around to see if any others amongst his comrades wished to challenge him, but none seemed up for it. He had defeated all of them at least once and rarely lost a sparring match against any of them. The only one John was yet to face was the bastard of the Dreadfort, whom John felt too uncomfortable to challenge. When John did the numbers in his head, it had been almost a year since the Blackfish started training him and they'd sparred together almost every day. With all of the Blackfish's mentorship and all the battles and skirmishes John had partaken in, the White Wolf had honed his skills and absorbed every technique that the Blackfish had imparted upon him over the past year. Anyone else? John asked, checking for confirmation that none other wished to challenge him. Most raised their hands in surrender, smiling and chuckling at how seriously John always took training. Theon had chided that even when John was sparring with Rolam, he had a look in his eyes like he was staring down Arthur Dane himself, and even though John took it easy on Rolam, he never fully let his guard down around him. John's seriousness was not without reason, for he had pledged to himself that he would never let his skills, however great, cloud his judgment. John had seen how ego and arrogance had betrayed the Kingslayer in the Whispering Wood. Had the Kingslayer given John even a modicum of actual respect as an opponent, John would have been cut down at 15 in his first battle by one of the greatest swordsmen in the realm, no questions asked. But the Kingslayer's pride and assurance in his own skills proved to be his undoing, and his insistence on toying with John cost him his hand. From his defeat, the Kingslayer had taught John a more valuable lesson than any of the techniques the Blackfish had given him, regardless of whether John was facing a knight of the Kingsguard with a Valyrian steel sword or a 12-year-old squire greener than fresh grass with a dagger. John would never make the mistake of underestimating an opponent, no matter how harmless they may seem. Just as John was about to leave the ring and let someone else have a go, a voice spoke out from behind him. "I will challenge you." John grimaced before turning around to face the man whose voice was uncomfortable for John to hear. The tall and burly Ramsay Snow was flexing out his fingers as he pulled the sleeve of his leather glove back, his ugly smile haunting John as the Bolton bastard glared at him. "Wish to test yourself against our White Wolf, Ramsay?" Robb asked amicably, standing next to Theon with his arms crossed. "Only to prove my worth in your battle guard, your grace," Ramsay said with a deep bow before turning to face John. With his bitter smile still on his face, Ramsay began to circle and John matched his footing, remaining adjacent to his opponent. Roose Bolton's son then casually flourished his blade and not yet turning his attention to John, a sign of arrogance, which John might be able to use against him in their match. "So, the bastard of Winterfell and the bastard of the Dreadfort finally meet," Ramsay said with a flamboyant wide-armed bow to John, making their comrades laugh gently, but John remained unamused. "I keep hearing stories about you, White Wolf. The way people in the north and here at Riverrun talk about you, you're the greatest swordsman who ever walked. Protege to the Blackfish himself, and you've bested 6 of Tywin Lannister's kinsmen with your own blade, 5 killed and 1 relieved of his sword hand, the Kingslayer no less, earning you the new moniker Leonspan. Maybe you are that good. Maybe not. Maybe you're just lucky. Do you want to find out?" Ramsay asked, brandishing his blade once again. A playful owing came from the rest of the battle guard, goading the confrontation forward. "I should warn you. In my experience, real combat is not always as chivalrous as men such as we are accustomed to. A desperate man will do whatever is necessary to survive when he feels the eyes of Rondrim upon him. So as a courtesy to someone of your skill, I would forewarn you that if I see an opportunity to prepare you against unchivalrous behavior, I will take it," Ramsay explained. Fanciful words, but John understood the subtext to mean that if the battle went against Ramsay, he intended to cheat and act like it was fair for him to do so. "We all have our own techniques to achieve victory. Fight as you will," John welcomed, though reluctantly. The two opponents raised their blades and prepared to engage, John taking long point guard while Ramsay challenged him with the high guard position. John had seen Ramsay spar with others. He was a violent fighter, so John wished to wait for him to make the first move. By blocking and parrying Ramsay's blows, John hoped to get a feel for the style and temperament with which Ramsay fought. The smiling bastard playfully faked a few quick movements trying to get John to flinch, but he refused to be rattled and remained composed and ready. Eventually, Ramsay made his first strike which John easily intercepted. What followed was a flurry of strikes, blows, parries and blocks on both sides as they circled one another with the sound of clinking tawny swords as they continued to battle. Eventually, the two pulled away, pointing their swords at one another in a mirroring ox-guard position as they continued to circle slowly. Ramsay smiled, seeming impressed with John's capabilities. John too couldn't help but respect the danger in Ramsay's combat skills. He was much bigger than John and used his strength to his advantage, but there was something raw about his combat skills. He knew how to handle a weapon but not with much eloquence, and his techniques were very simple and sometimes even clumsy. John saw a few openings to strike him during their trading of strikes but refrained from using them for fear they were traps, but now John was not so sure. In the North, the tradition of axe and sword saw that all men and women of the North got at least some training in combat, but the standard level of the traditional training seemed to be the ceiling of Ramsay's skills. Was Ramsay not formally trained by the Master-at-Arms at the Dread Fort? John wondered in silence. John had been trained alongside Robb and Theon by Sir Roderick, but Ramsay was not John, and Roose Bolton was certainly not Eddard Stark. Perhaps just because Roose Bolton was willing to make a minor acknowledgement of Ramsay as his bastard did not mean he had Ramsay raised and educated as he would be if he were a true-born son. In that moment, John felt an overwhelming surge of appreciation for his father and how much love and effort he put into raising him. My, you are good, brother. Perhaps you could show me a trick or two, Ramsay stated. John tightened the grip on his sword and began to feel anger welling up inside. You misspoke, Ramsay. You and I are no brothers, John corrected his opponent sternly, but the bastard of the Dread Fort kept smiling. Come now, brother. Neither of us can take the names of our fathers' houses, so does that not make us both sons of the House of Snow? Are we not both sons of the North, our shared mother? John lowered the tip of his sword, pointing it out towards Ramsay. A cute sentiment. But I know who my family is, John declared coldly. John was sick and tired of people telling him or questioning him about who his family was. The Starks were his family, Theon included. He had a father, an uncle, 4 brothers and 2 sisters, names and blood be damned. Ramsay chuckled and made another strike, smiling as he tried to overwhelm John with the aggressive power in his heavy combination of slashes and stabs. Since aggression and force were Ramsay's weapon of choice, John responded with such. The once wild and uncontrolled rage that had overcome John in moments of distress during the early days of the war was now a refined and controlled weapon in John's arsenal. Under the Blackfish's tutelage, John was now able to tap into his anger and use it in the form of focused violence against his enemies. No longer wild and uncontrollable, but instead direct and precise. John's anger fueled him and he began his riposte, striking at Ramsay with quick and strong movements, his thoughts and movements coming together with such speed that they felt instinctual. Ramsay was on the retreat, barely able to keep up with John's moves until finally John saw an opening to parry his blade away and jab him in the gut of his quilted vest, sending Ramsay to his knees coughing. A cheer erupted from the battle guard. John waited for Ramsay to yield as he collected his breath on the ground. Do you yield? Robb asked, looking down at Ramsay. As the bastard of the Dread Fort knelt in the courtyard, John noticed one hand gripping his sword which he planted in the soil, and his free hand was subtly making its way down to the cuff of his boot where John noticed the hilt of a small dagger tucked inside. Clearly, Ramsay meant to follow through on his unchivalrous methods to win, but John would have none of it. The White Wolf put the tip of his tawny sword to Ramsay's throat, causing him to stop and look up at John. After a moment of studying John's serious face, Ramsay dropped his sword and raised both his hands. Yield, he said with an ugly and evil smile. The battle guard applauded and cheered, Patrek and Smalljon coming over to help Ramsay to his feet and everyone coming close to pat the 2 Snows on their backs and compliment their fight. Well fought. I should count myself lucky that we are on the same side, Ramsay said, offering a hand to John. John still felt off about Ramsay, but reluctantly shook his hand. All right, I suppose that's enough for one day, Robb announced. They had all spent a few good hours training together that day and John agreed that it was a good note to end on. The battle guard returned their tawny weapons to the training racks and collected their proper sword. Rolam and Oliver went around offering water skins to everyone and the battle guard dispersed with everyone going their own way. After collecting Longclaw and politely refusing a water skin offered up by Rolam, John made his way back into the castle, returning to his chambers to wash up. His room was empty, with Ghost being left in the castle courtyard with Nymeria and Grey Wind. After stripping off his quilted vest, his doublet and his undershirt, John placed down a large bowl of water, a bar of soap and a long cloth. John then began to wash and scrub away at the sweat his body had built up during his sparring matches and rid himself of his odor. When John's pits no longer smelled foul, he washed away the soap suds and began to dry himself with the cloth. "Done already?" a playful voice asked. John pivoted his head to the door of his chambers, where leaning against the wall next to the door was Talisa, who had managed to slip into his room without him noticing her open or close the door. The beautiful young physician was smiling with delight as she examined John. "How long have you been lurking there?" John asked with a smile. "Not long enough," she said with a shrug as she began to approach John. John snickered and went over to put a fresh charcoal grey linen tunic on, covering his body. "I can't stay long, I have a council meeting soon. But if you're willing to wait, I can give you my undivided attention when I get back," John declared, taking Talisa into his arms. The two kissed passionately for a moment before Talisa pulled away. "As much as I would love that. I actually came to talk to you about something," she explained, her tone seeming nervous. "What is it?" John asked. The young surgeon sighed. "I'll be leaving Riverrun in a few days. Master Vargono's physicians and I will be traveling around the Riverlands, offering aid to those still waning from the damage brought on by the raids by the Mountain's men. Infected wounds, malnutrition and injuries that have gone without proper treatment. We have also been commissioned by the Queen to deliver food and supplies to the towns and villages that were attacked and return maimed and crippled soldiers back to their families. Jane has even assembled an honor guard to protect us as we roam the Riverlands," Talisa explained. John was disheartened to hear that Talisa would be away, but she'd be back soon. "That's brilliant," said John, smiling with pride about Talisa's coming venture. "I only bring it up because, with all the rumors about Rob's next move circling the castle and the camps, I worry you might not be here when I return," she explained. John nodded. "Perhaps not. I cannot give you much detail on our plans." "I understand," Talisa assured him. A silent moment passed between them as they held one another close. "You know, the way things are going. Some say that this war might not last much longer. If certain things go your way, you could be marching home soon," Talisa stated. "It's possible," John replied. "You know, in the past, people have left Master Vargono's services. My friend Arlos left us to open a practice in Bravos. Another named Ilanos left to become a physician for the Golden Company. Tirala and Sala left to settle down in Myr and marry. It is quite common for a physician to eventually find their own path and move on from the group," Talisa explained. John was enjoying what she was saying. "And, perhaps, when this war is over and Master Vargono and the others return to Essos, I could stay with you," she suggested. "I could take you back to the north." "You could come with me to Winterfell," John suggested. "Do you think they could use a surgeon there?" Talisa asked. "They would adore you. Maester Lewin is our physician, but he is a kind and open-minded man who would greatly value your skills." Talisa smiled. "I would like that very much." John was entranced by Talisa's eyes, her smile so gentle but so happy. He was so madly in love, and in his fast-beating heart he knew he wanted her to be a part of his life. In his wildest imagination, he could see himself marrying her, a little ceremony in the Godswood of Winterfell, just those closest to them. And eventually, in this fantasy, he would ask Robb to grant him leave to raise a holdfast, somewhere close by, a nice little place near the Wolf's Wood, less than a day's ride from Winterfell. Somewhere just for them. Before the war, John's greatest and most detailed fantasies involved him being legitimized by his father, or saving his father's life and being given ice as a reward. But now, after spending so much time with Talisa, all his fantasies were of her and the future they might one day build together. John once snapped at his uncle that he would never sire a bastard, but since meeting Talisa, he had pondered one day sowing children and having a family of his own. The two leaned in to kiss again but were interrupted by a knock at the door. They pulled away from one another and John cleared his throat. "Enter," he said. A young castle servant entered the chamber. "Lord Snow. King Robb requests your presence." "The council meeting is close at hand," the servant explained. John nodded and grabbed a dark doublet off the back of a chair and put it on as the servant nodded and left. I should go too. I have things to go over with Jane, Talisa explained. I'll find you later, John promised, and the two kissed once more before leaving the chamber. John made his way to the chamber where the council was being held and was one of the last to arrive. Once they were all assembled, they took their seats along the table and convened. It was the 5th time they'd held a session since the formation of Rob's new small council. Rob sat at the head of the table as the king should. On Rob's right was his newly appointed hand of the king, Uncle Benjen, who now wore an iron and bronze hand brooch upon his doublet. To his left was John, whose official role was advisor, though John knew not what for, but Rob insisted that he be there. The same being the case for Theon, Reynold and the Blackfish, who also sat on the council as advisors to the king. Next was the Lord Prince Edmure, whose official title was representative of the Trident, and sitting adjacent to him was Lord Yohn Royce, who spoke on behalf of Lord Prince Robert Arryn and his regent mother under the title representative of the Mountains and the Vale. The last seats on the council were occupied by people with actual titles. Sir Stephen Free was Master of Laws, Jason Mallister as Master of Ships, Wendell Mondaly as Master of Coin in place of his father who was in the north, Maester Vimen who stood in as the de facto Grand Master, and Petter Baelish who occupied the role of Master of Whisperers. Much like Ramsay, John didn't trust Littlefinger as far as he could throw him. When they were all settled in their seats, Rob spoke up. All right then, let us begin. Lord Baelish, where do we stand with our enemies? Rob asked. All is as it has remained, Your Grace. The Westerlands and the Iron Islands remain silent and for all intents and purposes broken from the combined force of yourself and Lord Ironbreaker. Dawn is still a watching ghost in our war. The Reach holds fast and watches as the two Stag Kings battle in the Stormlands, and Lord Tywine waits helplessly with his grandson in King's Landing with adversaries on all sides of them, Baelish explained. But King's Landing remains fortified and now 20,000 men stronger than it was when Renly and Stannis tried to attack it, Rob pointed out. Many of the councillors exchanged looks, concerned about Rob's assessment of King's Landing's defences. Since Lord Hoster's funeral, Rob's next course of action was clearly to attack King's Landing, and preliminary plans to amass their forces at Harrenhal had already been drawn up. But Rob was still hesitant to give the command, citing the city's defences and numbers and the exposure to Renly and Stannis as reasons not to attack. That may be so, Your Grace. But that also means that Lord Tywine has no allies to call on outside the castle. If we close in around him now, cut off his trade through the Rosa Road while Renly is occupied with Stannis and the city's defences are still in a state of repair, we can cut the head off this snake once and for all, the Bronze Yohn declared. But the city will not fall in a day for us against Tywine's full host when it was able to outlast two armies with a far smaller and weaker army, Rob asserted. With all due respect, Your Grace. Talk of numbers is moot. Between us here at Riverrun and Roose Bolton's forces at Harrenhal, we estimate that of your original force that set out from Moat Cailin, roughly 18,000 remain. Barely any of the 5,000 Valyman brought by the Bronze Yohn have been slain, and the second northern host under Mance Rayder still numbers at 40,000, and my men report that across the entirety of the Riverlands, we can still muster up to 13,000 men. If you give the command, a combined force of 76,000 men can be assembled at Harrenhal, not counting the reserved forces we could summon from the Vale, Prince Edmure explained. I have no intention of leaving my realm unprotected and throwing every single available soldier at King's Landing, Uncle. If we go forward with this, then 40,000 men will be sufficient to bring to King's Landing, Rob declared. So you agree it can be taken? Sir Stephen asked. Rob drummed his fingers on the table nervously. Does this not seem too easy? Too perfect for us? He asked, looking over to Benjen and John. Many wars are won in such a fashion, Benjen assured Rob. If we let this opportunity pass us by and Tywine continues to rebuild his strength, is that not a greater risk to us than this attack? Theon asked. After a shaky breath, Rob nodded his head. Very well. We will leave half our forces here in the Riverlands and position them at defensive positions in case the Ironborn or the Reach try to take advantage of the situation. We will join with Roose Bolton at Harrenhal as planned and march on King's Landing, Rob asserted, much to the joy of the council. What's next? Rob asked, leaning forward on the table. There are reports of disturbances in the Riverlands up north near the Twins, Sir Stephen explained. What kind of disturbances? Rob asked. My father claims several of his soldiers have been attacked, raided and ambushed by a group of outlaws. The reports implicate Sir Beric Dondarrion and his men as the attackers, Stephen explained. Beric Dondarrion. Benjen repeated. You know him, uncle? John asked. Only by reputation. He was the leader of the host sent by Ned to bring the Mountain to justice when he was first raiding the Riverlands. Some reported he had been killed by the Mountain, but when you boys went west, his name kept coming up as the leader of some sort of band of outlaws. They harassed and sabotaged Lannister interlopers and protected the small folk from the Mountain's pillaging. Edmure and I sent a few emissaries to find him so that we might recruit his force to our own, but he evaded any of our attempts to communicate with him, Benjen explained. Why would an enemy of the Lannisters start attacking free soldiers? Reynold asked. Benjen and Edmure both shrugged, neither of them able to think up an answer. My lord father has demanded that we deal with these rebels, citing that King Robb has sworn to protect his vassals, Stephen explained reluctantly, clearly disgusted by his father's arrogance and disrespect. I want this matter investigated. But I wish to understand why Sir Beric has turned on us so suddenly. These outlaws seem to have a good relationship with the small folk, so let us begin there. Find out what the local farmers and villagers in Lord Walder's land know about Sir Beric's actions, Robb commanded. The next item on the agenda was about addressing what letter to write to Bran about how he, as Prince of Winterfell, should deal with the Ryswells and the Dustins for their just about treasonous acts of defiance and inaction during the Ionbran invasion. While Theon and a few others wanted to have their heads on pikes, Robb did not want Bran to wage a civil war in the north so soon after rescuing it and decided that they would not pursue any action for the time being. Baelish gave his reports on Renly fighting in the Stormlands, Stannis remaining idle on Dragonstone, and his spies in King's Landing reported preparations to see Sansa returned were underway, which greatly warmed Robb, Theon, Jon and Benjen's hearts. The council went on for a few hours longer, discussing a variety of subjects about managing the kingdoms before finally, they called it to an end. As Jon exited the chamber, his uncle Benjen called to him. Jon, a moment. Jon couldn't help but glance at his hand of the king badge once more, which greatly suited him. A penannular brooch in the shape of a closed iron fist set in a bronze ring detailed with a northern knot pattern and a bronze pin in the shape of a tiny longsword to hold it in place. Is all well, uncle? Jon asked. It is, but I feel they could be better, Benjen began. May we speak somewhere more private? Jon's uncle asked, eyeing Baelish as he lurked nearby talking with Lord Royce. Benjen led Jon up the stairs and out to the battlements of Riverrun's roof where the two could be alone. The wind blew and Jon could see the 3 war camps on each of the banks outside Riverrun. You were very quiet today, Jon, Benjen declared as he leaned on the battlements of the castle. Jon joined his uncle, leaning on the parapets with his arms folded as he looked out. There wasn't much to be said, Jon explained, but his uncle shook his head. There was plenty to be said, and I saw in your eyes that you wanted to say it, but you wouldn't, Benjen declared. Jon sighed. Whatever I could think of to say was probably something everyone else was thinking. I'm no politician, uncle. I don't know why Robb even wants me on his council, it's not like I even have anything to contribute, Jon stated. That's not true. You were raised, trained and educated alongside Robb, you learned everything he did. It's not about the information, it's about your temperament, your outlook, the way you respond to situations. You have always had a calm and practical mind, and Robb has always benefited from your advice, but you've convinced yourself that rulership is something you have no voice in, and so you choose to remain silent, Benjen declared. Jon scoffed and shook his head. That's never been part of my life, uncle. Since I was a boy I've always known my place. I can be Robb's soldier, Robb's lieutenant and Robb's brother, but not his advisor. Bastards are not made to rule, Jon declared. Do you really believe that? Are you truly convinced that a soldier is all you'll ever be? Benjen asked. Jon's uncle then pulled his hand of the king brooch off his doublet and held it in his hand. I am 33, Jon. Not yet an old man, but there are many years between you boys and I. Even if I wear this badge to my grave, Robb will still outlive me for many years. Besides, I do not expect to wear it forever. In time I would like to lead a more settled life with Taita, meaning someone will need to wear this in my place, Benjen explained, handing the badge across to Jon. Jon took the badge and held it between his fingers. Jon had never presumed such a thing. To rule the north and rule from Winterfell was a child's fantasy he had for himself, a dream that his father would write a letter to the king and have him legitimized and make him a Stark. A guilty fantasy that Jon detested himself for having, for it meant usurping Robb in those dreams, but was there truly a way out? Robb wearing the crown, Jon wearing the badge, both forged in bronze and iron and their Valyrian steel swords of ice and Longclaw in their hands, ruling the north, the Riverlands and the Vale together. Did Jon dare to dream such a thing? You sit on this council because Robb wants you to rule with him, that's the way Ned would have wanted it, Benjen declared. You may think yourself only a soldier because that's all you think you are meant to be, but there is a leader in you, Jon. I've seen it. It's in your blood, the blood of kings, Benjen explained. The blood of the kings of winter runs in all our veins, Jon stated, handing the badge back to his uncle. Right, Benjen said, his eyes seeming to avoid Jon for a moment as though he were hiding something, but it was probably just Jon's imagination. It's getting late. I will see you later, Benjen declared, stepping back from the battlements. Think about what I said Benjen, patting Jon on the shoulder before heading in. Jon remained there a while longer, thinking about his future. He'd already received so much more than he thought someone of his standing was entitled to. His father could have ignored him, dismissed him or given him scraps of affection as Ramsay seemed to have been given. It would have been so much easier on Lord Stark's reputation to forget about Jon, but instead, he gave Jon a home, a family and a lord's upbringing. Robb had given him a place in his army. The Kingslayer had given him a reputation. The old bear had given him a sword. The blackfish gave him skills. Talisa gave him her heart, which was worth more than all the wealth of the world. Now Robb and Benjen were conspiring to ready Jon for the Hand of the King badge. How did Jon have so much in his life without asking for any of it? It made Jon so grateful for everything he had and also fearful of what kind of man he could have been if he had been raised with a sense of ambition and a hunger to have more in his life, for Jon feared to even imagine what heights he could rise to if he sought power as others did. And for that, he was thankful he was born a bastard. Jon then left the battlements and made his way back to his chamber. The sun was starting to lower in the sky with the night fast approaching. Chapter 54, A New Stratagem. Chapter Text. Every few days more ships arrived on the shores of Dragonstone, fishing ships, cogs and galleys, carrying everything from peasants, farmers, traders, merchants, craftsmen and freed slaves to sell swords, warrior cults and priests all sworn to the Red God, Arla. Stannis was furious when he returned to Dragonstone after his crushing defeat at the hands of Joffrey and Renly at the Battle of the Blackwater. It was meant to be his great triumph. He was meant to ascend the Iron Throne that night and put the traitors and rebels to the stake. Instead, he sent half his ships into Wildfire, costing him many of his lords and knights as well as his artillery, all because the Red Woman willed it. Then Stannis put his trust in her once again, landing along the shore by the chain boom and marching his armies over a bridge of Wildfire, and it did them well for a time. Melisandre promised him they would not burn, and they did not. Instead, they armored themselves in the green flame that did them no harm but melted the arrows that stuck their armor, vanquished the morale of his enemies while invigorating his own men with courage of 1,000 men, feeling themselves invincible as they carried their coats of Wildfire. The pikes, swords and shields of their enemies melted away at the touch of their gauntlets, and their skin blackened and blistered at the slice of their blades. Glory awaited them as they made short work of Joffrey and Renly's men alike, but then the green flames began to die down and fade from them, and once again they were rendered normal men, their mortal flesh beneath the flame exposed to the dangers of steel's cold kiss. Then the Boy King, the inbred bastard abomination who had been flaunted about as Stannis' own flesh and blood for so many years, he picked that moment to show actual backbone for the first time in his life and led a sortie against Stannis out the postern of the Mudgate. Then the old lion Tywine came charging down the Fish Market's way, trampling over Renly's men to reach him. Cornered on both sides, Stannis was forced over the shipwreck bridge of Wildfire into a retreat, a shameful display but the only option for the time. Stannis sailed away still with most of his foot soldiers intact but defeated nonetheless. Stannis wanted to strangle Melisandre for dictating the stratagem that had led to his defeat and strangle his accursed wife for forcing the Red Witch upon him, but he did not. For all his rage against Melisandre, he recognized she was instrumental in his victory at Storm's End, and if she had not foreseen the Wildfire trap and sprung it and not given her sorceries protection in the battle, then Stannis might have lost everything at the Blackwater. Melisandre explained to him that her magic was not infinite, much like the shadow demon that she had used to dispense of Sir Courtenay Penrose at Storm's End, at great cost to Stannis's health. She explained that her lord's power was taxing and not without limits. Since his victory against Renly at Storm's End, he'd valued Melisandre as a guarantee of victory, thinking her magic could best any challenge thrown at Stannis and grant him a swift victory. But now he understood that her power was advantageous but something he must wield wisely and choose carefully how to use. While their siege at King's Landing was a failure in many regards, it had set the ball in motion for more victories further down the line, as Melisandre had smugly predicted it would shortly after their return to Dragonstone. Far and wide, the legend of the Burning Stag spread. Housefell, Stedman, Whitehead, Kellington and several other smaller knightly houses all switched to Stannis' side from Renly's, and several of the castles split between Renly and Stannis supporters shifted all their support over to Stannis' side. To walk over wildfire unburned and wield it as a weapon was a sign of power that made people wish to follow him, either for fear of the danger he presented or out of a desire to align themselves with such a powerful figure. Stannis cared not for which reason so long as they were loyal to him. But the Stormlords who earned their place were but a small handful of what Stannis had gained. Across the narrow sea, the worshippers of the Red God heard of Stannis' deed and attributed it as a miracle of Azor Ahai's return. Stannis still cared not for their damnable prince that was promised nonsense so long as it remained a means to the end of Stannis gaining his rightful crown. He wished no ill towards them and saw no harm in playing the role they'd given him, but he was no pious man. He believed in none of it, not even the bits that insisted he believe in himself. Despite what people might have thought of him, he was not arrogant or egotistical, he was not a god and never thought of himself as such, nor a god's champion, but he was a man of laws. The written laws, customs and rights were the only true things to cling to in the world, written constructs perhaps, but the only true structures for all to agree upon and abide by, and those laws and rights said that Stannis was the rightful king and so he should be. The Red God worshippers who came to Dragonstone from the east were shuffled around between Driftmark, Claw Isle, Sharp Point and Stone Dance, Stannis' new acolytes training rigorously to become foot soldiers in Stannis' army. They brought what little gold and treasure they had and gave it to Stannis as tribute, and the beginning of a new army was set in motion. If Stannis would not have the obedience of the people of Westeros, then he would replace them with a new people to work the lands of Westeros, unceasingly devoted to him. Even more of his Westerosi bannermen were becoming more devoted to Orla after what happened at the Blackwater, and Melisandre now growing from an ostracized outsider to a respected and welcomed advisor by many in Stannis' court. From the battlements of Dragonstone, Stannis stood in the dark of the night and watched as new ships came to the harbour bringing more refugees to be conscripted and housed in his lands, loyal servants of their prince that was promised. "Your Grace," a voice called, drawing Stannis' attention away from the ships sailing into port. When Stannis turned, he saw his squire, young Davin Seaworth, standing there. "The council is ready for you. They await your arrival," he explained, bowing his head. Stannis nodded in understanding and marched from the battlements back into the castle of Dragonstone. Waiting for Stannis at the door out to the battlements were two of his Bright Guards. The Bright Guards were a warrior brotherhood of devoted servants of the Red Temples, similar to the Fiery Hand of the Temple in Volantis. The Bright Guards were a group of 50 men dressed head to toe in crimson robe-like garments with red gold plate armor over their garments and matching face-molded masks that they wore with their hoods. Their eyes were unseen beneath their masks, leaving just black gaping holes. Melisandre vouched for them and suggested Stannis make them his personal guards until his Kingsguard was formed, and then make them the retainers of his Kingsguard once he had his 7. They did not speak, they did not move told, asked or prompted to, and they were quick and skilled with spears, shields and blades. Melisandre explained that they were a brotherhood formed by one of her sister sects of Red worshippers and were designed to be protectors of Red priests and assassins of non-believers, twice as fierce, loyal and skilled than the Unsullied of Astapa. They had no identities anymore, no wants, needs or desires, only an undying loyalty to the Lord of Light and their prince that was promised. Melisandre asked Stannis to test their loyalty by asking any of them to kill themselves to prove their devotion to Stannis, but Stannis took Melisandre's word for their loyalty. Stannis made his way through the corridors of Dragonstone with his Bright Guards and Devan following behind. He walked through the twists and turns of the halls and up the stairs to the top floor of the stone drum to the chamber of the painted table. Some 40 people were all gathered there, knights, lords, sellsword commanders, Davos's pirate friend, a variety of inconsistent Red priests, some warriors dressed in red, some tattooed or burned, some men, some women, no uniformity and very little consistency amongst their attire, some dressed richly, some dressed poorly, almost all of them different from one another. Prominently standing amongst the red priests was Melisandre. Everyone bowed their heads with reverence when Stannis entered the chamber, his godlike reputation that he never asked for following him around. He did not mind respect, but he was not his brother Renly. Ego was of no concern to him. He cared not for how deeply or how shallowly they bowed so long as they bowed, for he was their liege. Stannis made his way immediately to the mounted stone chair of Aegon the Conqueror and sat down overlooking the map-carved table of Westeros covered in markers indicating the positions of the 5 kings and their forces. King Balon Greyjoy had regressed back to the Iron Islands and lost all he'd taken in the north. King Joffrey's territories were split between the Westerlands and the coast of the Crown Lands. King Robb had the most territory, holding the Riverlands and just about everything north of it. King Renly still had the reach and had been busy eating away at Stannis's castles in the Stormlands ever since his retreat from King's Landing. Furthermore, reports had indicated that the Rosa Road had reopened trade with King's Landing, filling the capital with food and supplies and ending their famine, all thanks to the non-aggression pact with Joffrey that Renly was forced into after his wife Margaery's capture. Stannis's territory was the smallest and most unimpressive looking on the map, and all knew it. "What news have we?" Stannis asked, looking around at his assembled war council. The hand of the king, Aelister Florent, stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Much remains the same as it was, Your Grace. Almost all the castles and holdfasts in the Kingswood loyal to us or besieged by our men have been solidified, for Renly and his vassals in your homeland have been emboldened to attack yours. Reports say he marches towards Felwood and 1 smaller castle, 3 holdfasts and 2 moats nearby, all loyal to House Fel and in turn loyal to you. Your Grace, with all these new ships and refugees from Essos bringing us voluntary foreign aid, I believe that now is the time." "What else?" Stannis asked immediately. "Your Grace." Lord Aelister asked with confusion. "This war encapsulates 7 kingdoms and 5 kings. Beyond Renly, what else do we know?" Stannis asked. Aelister stuttered for a moment before finding his words. "Joffrey and Tywine are trapped in King's Landing, still supplied by the Tyrells through their non-aggression pact but unable to march with all their borders manned by enemies. King Robb remains in Riverrun but is expected to move east towards Harrenhal and link up with his forces there led by Roose Bolton and finally, move on the capital," Aelister explained, pointing to the map markers. "Balon Greyjoy remains silent since his crushing defeat in the north, as does the Westerlands, and Dorne remains as absent as ever," Lord Aelister concluded. "Now back to the matter in the Stormlands. We lost 8,000 men during the Battle of the Blackwater. But between all the new levies we have been able to raise and all your devout followers and the new sellswords we have been able to hire with the gold given to you as tribute, we now have double the force we took to King's Landing with a combined number of 40,000 and ships to carry them. Now is the time." "How long until Robb Stark is expected to march south?" Stannis asked. Again Lord Aelister was confused. One cannot say. I am sure the Red Priests might be able to drum up some visions for us, but, as far as we can tell, Robb Stark will march when he marches," Aelister explained. "And how long will it take Robb Stark to get from Riverrun to King's Landing?" Stannis asked. Aelister was starting to look a dumbstruck fool in Stannis's eyes with how confused he was getting, and Stannis was half tempted to rip the hand of the king badge of his breast and give it to Sir Davos. Stannis would take an illiterate common born with loyalty and a decisive mind over whatever Lord Aelister was any day. It's hard to say. It all depends on how many men he brings and how long he reprieves at Harrenhal, but if I had to guess, 2 months," Aelister said in a very unsure voice. Stannis scratched his chin and studied the markers on the painted table. "Your Grace, we must seriously get back to the matter of Renly and his incursion into the Stormlands. If we ready our fleet now we can be. We have men in training, yes?" Stannis asked. "Yes, Your Grace. Entire villages of refugees all over Crackclaw Point with nearly more volunteers than we know what to do with," Aelister declared. "How many of these training will be ready in 2 months?" 2,000 I would hazard. Then take 2,000 of my devout followers from the refugees. Men picked by Melisandre to fight and die for me to the last man, and send them to the Stormlands to reinforce our men there and cut down as much of Renly's host as they can. I want my brother's forces to be bled and be bled well. Let them serve as a vanguard to test the resolve of the rest. Murmurs filled the room with everyone questioning the king's meanings. Only 2,000, sire. But we have 20 times that force. Why such a small retinue to challenge Renly? Surely they cannot beat his force, Sir Richard Hawke declared. I do not expect them to beat his force, I expect them to slow and weaken his force. I will not let him take the Stormlands with speed, and I will not let him take them decisively. Perhaps I cannot make his victory a Pyrrhic one, but at least he will reconquer them at the cost of a pound of flesh that he will not soon forget, Stannis declared. But your grace. You are the superior tactician, you defeated him once already. You've raised your force to 40,000 men in a short time, and you have Lady Melisandre's power and the other Red Priests. Why give Renly any victory when you can destroy him in one battle? Sir Justin Massey asked. Just because something can be done does not mean it should be done. Yes, I imagine if I face my brother on the field once more I will win and he will die, but that course of action does not suit us at the moment, Stannis asserted. But how does removing a pretender king and solidifying the Stormlands not bode well for us? Alistair asked. Because while Renly's death will solidify the Stormlands for us, it will also solidify the Reach for Joffrey. The Tyrell girl is still Joffrey's hostage, and if she remains such when Renly dies, the Tyrells will cleave themselves to Tywin's side for her sake. The non-aggression pact will become an alliance overnight, and Joffrey will have safe passage to Casterly Rock through Mace Tyrell's lands before the Stark boy can come down on him. I will let Renly keep his life and take the Stormlands while he may, let him be occupied there for now. Write letters to my vassals in the Stormlands, permit them to surrender to Renly after thinning his ranks the best they can, but ensure they remember who their true king is when I return to deal with my brother, Stannis declared. You mean to let Renly have the Stormlands? Those lands are yours by right, your grace, one of the knights asserted. When my brother declared himself king by right of conquest and by rights of my grandmother's Targaryen lineage, all lands in Westeros became mine by right with his passing, Stannis corrected the knight. I will have the Stormlands united under me in time, but now is not the right time. One small mercy of having so many treasonous rebel claimants is that it keeps division in the Seven Kingdoms and prevents my enemies from growing too large in power, Stannis asserted to his lords, knights and priests. So if not the unity of Stormlands, what will your target be? King's Landing once more? Alistair asked. No. Let Robb Stark try his hand at it. He has no desire for the Iron Throne, only the heads of Joffrey, Tywin and their kin. Let the young wolf have his heads and his vengeance for Ned Stark if he can take it. It matters little to me who swings the sword so long as Joffrey is dead. Lord Alistair scoffed. But, your grace, Joffrey insults your family's honor by stealing your throne and parading himself around as your brother's true-born son, and Renly repudiates the rightful succession against his own blood for his greed. Do you not want the glory of killing them yourself? Stannis rose from his seat. Want? What does want have to do with any of this? My personal wants have never been my first priority in this war, Stannis snapped. The king then stepped down from his chair and approached his Onion Knight. Sir Davos, remove your glove, Stannis commanded. The Onion Knight removed his glove from his left hand and presented it to the king, who held it aloft for all in the room to see, the four missing the first joints of the fingers. Look here. This is a man who saved my life and my brother's life and the lives of all who outlived the siege in Storm's End during my brother's war against the Mad King and the Last Dragon. Davos here was a smuggler, wanted for his crimes, but during the war, he evaded the Red Wine Fleet's blockade of Shipbreaker Bay to smuggle onions and salted fish into the castle. If not for him I would have died of starvation many years ago. I wanted to give him a knighthood and lands for his services, but the law and my duty demanded I punish him for his past crimes. So I took his fingers and then gave him the knighthood I felt he deserved. I put duty before my wants, Stannis declared before releasing Davos's hand and walking around the painted table. I am not your king because I want to be. I am your king because my brother died with no true-born children of his own, and I am the eldest of his younger brothers. A soldier does not abandon his post, and I must not abandon mine, and so it is my duty to be your king. My wants to see Joffrey, Renly and the whore Queen Cersei pay for their crimes are naught to my duty to unite the Seven Kingdoms, and if that goal is to be achieved, my focus is lie elsewhere, Stannis asserted as he continued to walk around the table. So you do mean to attack, but not Joffrey and not Renly, Davos surmised. No. We will spend the next 2 months training up to 2,000 of the refugees to replace the men we send to reinforce the Stormlands. Then if Robb Stark isn't at the gates of King's Landing or on the King's Road south to it, we will wait until he is, Stannis asserted, picking his own map marker off of Dragonstone and walking further along the table. Then we will take our force of 40,000 men and deploy them to the Vale. With that, Stannis set the marker down over the Eyrie with a firm stamp. Once again, the lords and knights chattered amongst themselves, bewildered by Stannis's bold course of action. Your Grace, the Vale has barely dipped its toe into this war. They've sworn to the young wolf, true enough, but they've only pledged a small force, no bigger than 5,000, Sagadri Faring pointed out. Exactly. Every other participant in this war has been properly blooded in the conflict. The North, the Riverlands, the Crown Lands, the Reach, the Westerlands and the Stormlands. All have properly committed sizable forces or received sizable attacks, and all have had sizable losses. For too long, this boy king has been making fools of the rest of us. He has 3 full kingdoms under his command, which is more than can be said for myself, for Renly, for Balon or for Joffrey. Robb Stark might be the only one in this war thus far who can plausibly make the claim that he is winning. If we continue to deplete our forces fighting with Renly and Joffrey while the young wolf keeps 1/3 of his forces in reserve, how can we ever expect to beat him in the field? I had hoped that Balon Greyjoy might last long enough to create a humbling campaign against the boy, but that has not gone as I would have had it. Stark must suffer a deep cut so that he can no longer stand tall against us. I bear no ill will towards him winning against the Lannisters and my brother, but when I demand he kneels before me and he refuses, which I know he will, I must be able to break him. If I am to do that, the host Robb Stark commands now must be the only strength he can call upon, Stannis declared. Next, one of Stannis's newly arrived Red Priests stepped forward. Your Grace. The Lord of Light offers us many visions into the future, some conflicting, showing many different paths, some victorious and some in failure. We have looked into the flames and groped for visions in the Stormlands, King's Landing and Harrenhal, but we have not asked the Lord to show us visions of the Vale, nor has he shown us any. Then ask him the next time you cross a brazier, Stannis commanded. Your Grace. The Vale is one of the most defendable of all the 7 kingdoms, one of his lords pointed out. From the Bloody Gate, perhaps, but not the coast. We start with pincering the lowest arm of their coast at Gulltown and Runestone. From there we sweep west to Iron Oaks, the Red Fort and Old Anchor. We can use numbers and superior tactics to thin their forces along the coast, but when we reach the Mountains of the Moon, they will use the narrow mountain passes to create choke points where numbers become meaningless and they can throw us back wave after wave. But that is a double-edged blade, and we will use it to guard our flanks from attackers when we close in around the Eyrie. I knew the Lady Lysa for many years when her husband Jon Arryn served as Hand. She is a paranoid and dramatic woman. We may have no way of taking the Eyrie, perhaps we might not even take the Gates of the Moon. But Lysa will summon all the Knights of the Vale to the Eyrie to rescue her and her son, and we can use the mountain passes to funnel their knights into the slaughter of our pikesmen and position archers along the ridges of the mountains to fire down on them. In essence, Lysa will bring the Vale's armies from all across their lands to us so that they may be killed, Stannis explained, leaning on the table and pointing to key points in the Vale. Stannis waited for the next one of his advising knights, lord and priests, to advise him or prester him, but they were all silent. The king looked around and studied the faces of his vassals, wondering why none of them had anything to say. Eventually, Stannis's eyes settled on Davos, always the most honest man in his retinue. What say you, Sir Davos? Have you any questions or comments on my new stratagem? Stannis asked, looking to the Onion Knight. Davos hesitated to speak for a moment and then huffed out a break of air. Is this your will, your grace? Davos asked. It is. Well, then, that's settled. I suppose we should make ready. With that, all of Stannis's vassals fell in line and started offering their advice and discussing how to best prepare for their new northern offensive. Chapter 55, Riding Out. Chapter text. Robb stood still, with his feet apart and his arms out, while Oliver and Rolam dressed him in his armor. Robb had been dressing himself since he was old enough to buckle his own boots, but what was the point in having squires if they did not get to tend to you? Rolam would enthusiastically pass Oliver the pieces of Robb's suit and the free squire would dress it over Robb. It was Rob's first time wearing his new set of armor since the Riverrun smiths had him fitted for it. Rob's suit of armor had been fairly damaged during the Westerlands campaign. Not unwearable, but greatly dented and scuffed, mostly from his fall at the crag, so a fresh one was made for him. He wore his suit of steel plate armor over his mail, and on top of the plate was a white tabard that went no further than his thighs and sleeves no longer than his elbows. The tabard was lined with grey fur and northern runic borders, and emblazoned upon the chest was the grey head of the stark direwolf. Around his waist over the tabard was his sword belt and a coif of mail on top. The blacksmiths outdid themselves with Rob's new helm. It was fashioned in the style of a northern wideband spangen helm of steel with bronze detailing. This helm wrapped all the way around his head, even fitted with a bever and a liftable great bassinet visor attached to it. An adequate blend of styles between a northern warrior and a southern knight. Rob missed his old armor set, or rather the scratches and dents in it that made him look weathered and experienced in warfare, but his new armor would soon be tested in battle when they reached King's Landing. Oliver and Roland were already dressed for travel in their light armor of mail and leather. After Rob was fully dressed and armed, he nodded in appreciation to his two squires and dismissed them to go and ready themselves for the journey and await him at the boats. It had been nearly a year since Rob first came to Riverrun at the end of the Battle of the Camps. Since then he'd left and returned from the Westerlands, and now he was setting out once more, this time for King's Landing. For so long Rob had been working towards this battle, and now it was finally in reach, but his eagerness was not as strong as it had been a year ago. When Rob first set out for war, he thought King's Landing was the apex of victory. Once King's Landing was taken, his family would be freed, Joffrey's head would roll, and Rob would have achieved all he had strived towards in this war, but things were not that simple. Even with his father dead and Arya freed, he still needed to take King's Landing. With Tywin, Joffrey, the Queen, the Kingslayer, the Imp and the rest of the Lannister army all tucked inside its walls, Rob could finally bring an end to the Lannister threat and bring justice to his father's murder. More than that, Sansa was there, and his family's sword, Ice, as well, which by all the gods Rob would get back from Joffrey and his grandfather. But a gnawing in his gut told him that while Rob's reason to fight would end there, the war might not. The Westerlands and the Crown Lands might be broken, and Balon Greyjoy had presumably been humbled enough by his failed invasion to not try it again, but Rob worried for Stannis and Renly. The two Baratheon brothers would continue to fight amongst themselves, and eventually one of them would win, and whoever did would presumably secure the support of the leaderless Crownlands and Westerlands, as well as the forces of whichever Baratheon brother ended up slain. How long could Rob sit by his hearth with his family safe before his uncle Edmure sent him a letter telling him of a Baratheon army at his borders demanding his fealty? In the near future, when Rob will be standing in the Red Keep with his arms around Sansa, watching as Grey Wind and Ghost fight over Joffrey's headless corpse for a meal, tugging at either of his arms or legs, Rob would need to make decisions about how to proceed. Will he fight the Baratheon brothers? Will he sue for peace? Will he strike a pact with one of them? Time will tell. Grey Wind had been in the chamber the entire time, lying on a cushion and watching as Oliver and Roland dressed his master. When Rob was ready, his helm tucked under one arm and the other on the hilt of his arming sword, he whistled Grey Wind to his side and left his chamber. Rob made his way through the halls of Riverrun, passing guards and servants who bowed with reverence as he and Grey Wind made their way through. Eventually, Rob and Grey Wind came to a corridor and found Jon, Theon, Reynold and Ghost waiting for them. The bastard brothers, the foster brother and the good brother, all loved and trusted equally to Rob just as much as Bran or Rickon were. Jon wore a black studded leather brigandine. His rebraces, vambraces and cuisses were all made of studded splint. Cutters, gauntlets, greaves and sabatons made of steel. A chainmail coif hung around his neck, his spiked steel pauldrons over stacked lames. His sword belt carried 3 items, a short sword at one hip, an arming dagger at the other and a long single-edged rondel dagger sheathed at the back of his waist. Lastly, sheathed upon his back by a diagonal running belt was Longclaw. Theon on the other hand wore a suit of heavy dark plate detailed with crooked tentacles over dark chainmail, a long yellow cloak, his quiver and bow strapped to his back, and hanging from his waist was his battle axe, sword and dagger. The axe, armor and cloak trophies of war, taken with the iron price from his uncle Victorian, as was his right. Reynold dressed in steel plate over mail with a sand-colored surcoat marked with 6 white seashells, an arming sword sheathed at one hip and a war pick that he'd grown fond of using sheathed at the other hip. Each of them clutched their helmets either to their breasts or under their arms, a kraken-molded helm for Theon, a wolf-sculpted bassinet for Jon and an armet for Reynard. "Is everything ready, brothers?" Robb asked, looking at the three of them. "The army has assembled itself on the east bank, your banners are awaiting you to lead them, your grace," Theon declared. "Very good," Robb said with a solemn nod, stepping past his three brothers and leading them on through the castle. Eventually, Robb, his three brothers and the two direwolves found their way out of the castle, following a set of stairs down to the castle courtyard. Standing there lined up in a small group was the household that would be left behind at Riverrun. The steward Uther Idswain, the master-at-arms Desmond Grill, the captain of the guard Robin Roger, Maester Vimen and Sir Rolf Spicer were among them. Standing prominently at the front was the royal household. Lady Sybil Spicer, Elinor Westerling, Roslyn and Tita Free, Robb's mother Caitlin, Arya and of course, Jane standing there. Rolam was there, in the midst of hugging his mother and sisters farewell with tears in their eyes. When Robb came into the courtyard, Grey Wind and Ghost padded past him and went to Nymeria, sniffing and nuzzling her as she softly whined. Direwolves were greatly intelligent creatures, and the walk bond they had with their Stark companions allowed them to sense and understand that they were to part ways once again. Standing in the courtyard also saying their farewells were Benjen, the Blackfish and Lord Prince Ed Muir, all of them dressed in plate armor. When Robb's presence in the courtyard became known, all turned to him and bowed. Robb then stood before the assembled party of Riverrun. "My ladies, my knights, my family and good people of Riverrun. Since the beginning of this war, this castle of my grandfather and my uncle has stood proudly by the north in our struggle against the Lannisters. These walls have stood against siege when the Kingslayer marched here and have hosted us well during the length of this war, welcoming myself and my armies into its walls twice. Now I must leave once more, this time for King's Landing, to do away with the Lannisters and rescue my sister. Riding with me will be this castle's liege lord and prince, my uncle Ed Muir Tully, who shall help me to face the Lannisters in combat. In his absence and my own, I hereby name my wife, Queen Jane Westerling, Regent of the Riverlands until our return, and to Uther Idswain I entrust you to act as her advisor, the marshal of her forces that remain here in Riverrun, and furthermore, Castellan of Riverrun to aid her in defending our borders from any threat that might incur during our campaign in the Crown Lands," Robb declared. Uther Ids nodded respectfully to the king. Once the announcement was over, the crowd dispersed and everyone made proper goodbyes to one another. Wrapping their arms around one another and professing their love and good fortune to one another. Robb shook hands with Grill, Wayne, Roger, Vimen and Sir Rolf, hearing their words of praise and prayers. Reynold and Rolam went to their mother and sisters, embracing them and swearing to look out for one another on the field. Arya went to Jon and Theon, making her last pleads to take her with them and let her fight at King's Landing, gripping the hilt of her needle. Benjen and Ed Muir farewelled their betrothed and to Caitlin, embracing her and kissing her cheeks. Finally, Robb made his way over to Arya, dropping to his knee and holding her tight. "After so long apart, it feels too soon for us to say our goodbyes again," Robb said as he looked upon his sister's glum face. "Then take me with you. Let me ride with your host so that we don't have to be parted. I don't need much, I can pack light. Nymeria and I can catch up with you on the road, just let Sir Desmond send a handful of riders to escort me to you," Arya begged. Robb hung his head and snorted. "And let you lead the vanguard with a broadaxe in hand? Mother's heart would give out," he teased. Arya furrowed her brow. "You don't have to bring me to battle. Just let me stay in the camp while you do the fighting, and when the siege is over you can take me up to the Red Keep. There I can poke out Joffrey's eyes with needle and let Nymeria bite his cock off before you cut off his stupid girly head." Robb laughed with amused joy at Arya's proposition and shook his head. "I'm sorry Arya, but I need you and Nymeria here, protecting our mother and my queen, Jane. She'll need someone as courageous as you guarding her," Robb said, but his words were not well received, with Arya giving an unimpressed look. "Don't talk to me like I'm a baby," Arya asked. Robb sighed. "You already escaped King's Landing once, I would not bring you back to that wretched place again. That city is a curse upon our bloodline. Our grandfather, our uncle and our father were all murdered there. If it were not for rescuing Sansa and ending the threat of our enemies, then I would not venture there myself," Robb asserted. Arya's eyes glumly lowered to the ground, but Robb nudged her chin, lifting her sights back up to his eyeline. "Hey. We'll be back soon, with Sansa, with Ice and with Joffrey's head. After that, we can all go home, Rob promised, prompting a smile from little Arya. The two then shared a strong embrace before Rob finally let go and stood up. Next, Rob went to his mother, still a prisoner in his custody, or rather now in Jane's custody, but still his mother nonetheless. Since returning to Riverrun, his attitude towards his mother had softened as he calmed down, and now his disdain for her actions was almost entirely gone. Soon enough, Sansa might be rescued and Jaime Lannister finally dead or back in a cell once they took King's Landing, and all the sins of her mother's desperation might be washed away. You would think we would be better at goodbyes by now, Lady Catelyn suggested half-heartedly. True. But at least we have gotten quite good at reunions, Rob said, brightening his mother's smile. I know I have no right to ask you for this, or anything else after my past actions, but I must beg you, when you get to King's Landing, Sansa comes first. She must be your utmost priority, even more than vengeance against Joffrey and Tywin, she pleaded. Rob sighed. Mother. The nature of a hostage is someone you hold at your mercy and threaten pain and death upon to enforce your demands on those that love them. Every step you have taken in this war has been a test of the Lannisters' blade against her throat, and when you stand before the walls of King's Landing, the ultimatum of that blade will be forced upon them. If you take your army to King's Landing, Tywin Lannister and the Queen will threaten your sister's safety as leverage against you. If you call his bluff, Sansa will die. I know all the grief the Lannisters have thrust upon us in this war, but promise me you will use diplomacy first. Offer terms of peace, offer your word as a Stark to withdraw back to the Riverlands in exchange for Sansa, and then let Renly and Stannis have Joffrey and his kin, she begged of her eldest son. I will do everything I can to make Sansa safe. I swear before my gods and yours and any others that will hear me that I will not rest until Sansa is back with us. If I must to come to some kind of exchange with the Lannisters for her, I will consider it. If you need to understand, there are lines I cannot cross, even for Sansa. Prices I cannot pay, even for Sansa. If Tywin holds a blade to my sister's throat and asks me to take her and withdraw or give safe passage to his family, I will grant it, begrudgingly. But if he means to turn me away from the city while he keeps Sansa, or wishes to use her to force me into some kind of pact that pits me against his grandson's competitors like he did with Margaery Tyrell, then I cannot accept. If Tywin knows he can use Sansa's life to hold me at bay, then he will never let us get her back. I might not have a choice in this, Mother, Rob declared, though took no pleasure in it. Sansa was his little sister. The idea of sacrificing her for the sake of the war and his kingdoms made Rob resent ever having the hubris to take the crown in the first place when his vassals first offered it up to him. Catelyn gave out a shaky exhale of sorrow and grief. Perhaps if I had not betrayed you and freed Sir Jaime, we might have used him as leverage for Sansa's safety. It seems you were right, nothing is sacred to that accursed man, not even his queer love for his sister. He played me for a fool, just as you said, Catelyn lamented. Rob rested his hands on his mother's shoulders comfortingly. Perhaps. But perhaps not. We know not what is transpiring within the walls of King's Landing at this moment. Lord Baelish has spies in the Red Keep tasked with guarding Sansa. If the imp is as decent a man as Jon has purported him to be, then perhaps Sansa's safety might be guaranteed before we even arrive, Rob suggested, trying to ease her mind. Lady Catelyn managed a faint smile and then looked over to Theon and Jon. Lord Snow. Lord Ironbreaker. Come here a moment, she bid them, much to the confusion of the two of them and all others who heard her words. Jon and Theon then glanced at one another in confusion before complying with the lady's commands, joining Rob at his side before the Lady of the Winterfell. She looked them up and down with her eyes, a gentle and tender expression on her face, rather than the stiff and cold look she often gave Jon or the serious one she tended to treat Theon with. I wish all three of you good fortune on your campaign to King's Landing. Guard yourselves well and watch over one another. King's Landing is a treacherous place that cost Lord Stark his life. I will sleep better knowing that each one of you is guarded by the other two. Promise me you will all take care, she pleaded softly. Rob, Jon and Theon were all confused, for Rob's mother had never spoken such soft and caring words to Theon before, and certainly not to Jon. While perplexed and stunned, Rob managed to speak. I swear, he said, though still surprised. I swear, Theon added. I swear, Jon said finally. Lady Catelyn smiled to them all. A serious look then fell upon her face as her eyes darted to the ground before she returned her gaze to Jon and Theon. I have never said this before, for so long I denied it to even be true for my own petty jealousies and paranoias. But I would never forgive myself if I did not say it here and now, for you deserve to hear it. The three of you are the sons of Eddard Stark. A tear formed in the corner of Catelyn's eye. And he loved you all, so very much. More than he was allowed to express in words to either of you for my sake, she said, looking at Jon and Theon. Theon and Jon were rendered speechless by Lady Catelyn's words, the look in their eyes as though they had been impaled through their hearts by lances. Lady Catelyn settled herself with an exhale of air as the tear rolled down her cheek. Now, the three of you have very clear goals: protect one another, avenge your father, save your sister and bring her home, Catelyn declared as though she was giving them orders as soldiers. Theon and Jon bowed their heads to Catelyn and called her my lady. Robb never thought he would see the day his mother would show such kindness to Theon or Jon, and yet she had. Her demeanor towards them had changed and become a great deal softer since they returned to Riverrun, but Robb had dismissed it as her feeling humble and too apologetic for her treason to speak harshly to either of them, but now Robb saw it was something different. Robb then left his mother with one final hug and continued to make his farewells until only one was left. Jane looked to him from across the courtyard as others between them made their farewells to one another. Jane nodded her head towards the corner of the courtyard and Robb met her there, private and away from the others. They came together wordlessly and embraced, holding one another tightly. 3 months they'd been together as husband and wife, and in that time she had become Robb's entire world. They held one another and rested their foreheads together. "I don't want you to go," Jane said softly. "Nor do I want to go. As a child, I dreamt of battle and glory, but now I want nothing more than to take you to Winterfell and live in peace," Robb told her. "When you get your sister back, then we can all go to Winterfell together," Jane said, speaking assuringly to Robb. "I'm sorry that I won't be here with you when your father arrives from Seaguard," said Robb. While Jane, Reynold, Rolam, Elenia, their mother and their uncle had all joined Robb's side along with the rest of the Crag's inhabitants, they could not say how their father would react. Lord Goran Westerling was described by all who knew him as a good and just man, but he was a vassal of Lord Tywin Lannister and not the sort of man to forsake an oath. After fighting in the Whispering Wood against Robb and being captured, and then his home of the Crag being captured by Robb as well, he was now the good father of his enemy, and his children, household and wife had all forsaken Tywin and Joffrey for Robb. Robb felt almost cowardly for leaving with Reynold and Rolam and letting Jane face her father's reaction to what had happened all by herself. "I can handle my father. He might be resistant for a time, but when he gets to meet you and understand you, I know he will become one of your loyalist vassals," Jane said assuringly. Jane then cleared her throat and glanced away to the others in the courtyard, seeming to make sure that no one was looking at them. "And I think he will be more inclined to accept our union when I give him some joyous news," she said in a quiet voice with the gentlest and warmest smile. Jane then took Robb's hand and put it to her belly. For a moment Robb was confused, but he quickly realized what she was telling him. Robb's eyes went wide, his heart fluttered in his chest and he felt flushed in his face. Jane quietly giggled at Robb's surprised look, and he could tell that his face was most likely as red as his hair. "You're really," Robb began, but couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Jane nodded. "These past few weeks, you were often out the door at the crack of dawn, hunting and training with your battle guard or drawing up battle plans with your council. Meanwhile, I had been getting sick in the mornings, vomiting into my chamber pot when you were out. I called Talisa to my chambers before she left with Vargono's physicians to examine me and she confirmed it," Jane explained. Robb held his wife's face in his hands, looking into her beautiful eyes. Does anyone else know?" Robb asked. Jane shook her head softly. "Just Talisa, you and I. I will discreetly inform Maester Vimen when I have a chance, but for now, I just want this to be ours." "No need to get everyone excited so soon," Jane stated. Robb leaned in and kissed his wife passionately with all his heart. Grey Wind interrupted them, nuzzling up by their side and bringing the two of them to laughter. "I love you," Robb declared fiercely as he looked at Jane. Soon all their goodbyes were said and it was time to leave. Rolam came along and presented Robb with his helm, picking it up from where he had left it when he began his farewell speech. They all made their way to the dinghies at the water gate where Oliver was waiting for them along with some Tully soldiers to row them out. Robb, Jon, Theon, Reynold, Ed Muir, the Blackfish, Benjen, Rolam, Oliver, Grey Wind and Ghost then piled onto the little boats with their rowers and departed from Riverrun. Their loved ones and the Riverrun courtiers standing at the edge of the water stairs and watching them as they were rowed out of the castle, waving in farewell. The dinghies rowed out the stone archway over the water, the bottom spikes of the portcullis above them, and they were brought out onto the waters of the Tumblestone, those they'd left behind disappearing through the tunnel as they got further away. Rowers brought them about and down the Red Fork towards the bank adjacent to Riverrun where the army was assembled. The combined force of the three camps had been brought together on the eastern bank of the fork where Fawley Prester had been during the Kingslayer's siege. Rob's great army was assembled and ready to march for Harrenhal. Along the bank, a few soldiers awaited them with